Welcome to Sleep for Stories. Thank you for joining us on this relaxing and mysterious journey. Let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future tales. Wishing you a peaceful listening experience and a restful sleep. The Crimson Haven Hotel had always been an enigma. Its tall, ornate spires and Gothic arches loomed over the bustling city streets, casting long, eerie shadows at dusk. Built in the late 1800s, the hotel was a masterpiece of Victorian architecture, but its charm was overshadowed by decades of whispered rumors and unexplained events. Guests often spoke of odd occurrences, doors closing on their own, faint whispers in empty corridors, and a chill that seemed to follow anyone brave enough to wander the halls at night. Yet, despite its reputation, or perhaps because of it, the hotel remained a popular destination for thrill-seekers and skeptics alike. Among these was Eliza Harrington, a seasoned travel journalist known for her penchant for uncovering the world's strangest mysteries. Her blog, Wandering Shadows, had a devoted following, and she prided herself on going where others dared not. When Eliza arrived at the Crimson Haven on a rainy November evening, she immediately sensed something unusual. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive, and the faint scent of damp wood and old paper lingered in the lobby. She approached the reception desk, where a middle-aged concierge with a polite but wary expression greeted her. "I'd like a room for the night," Eliza said, her voice firm. "Of course, ma'am," the concierge replied, reaching for the reservation book. "Would you prefer a suite or a standard room?" Eliza's eyes flicked to the wall behind him, where a row of ornate keys hung neatly on brass hooks. Among them was one marked Room 13, its number etched into the brass plate in elegant script. "That one?" she said, pointing. "Room 13? The concierge hesitated, his hand pausing midair. A flicker of unease crossed his face before he quickly masked it with a professional smile. "I'm afraid that room is unavailable." "Why?" Eliza pressed, her journalist instincts kicking in. "Is it under renovation? Something like that?" he replied, his tone evasive. "Perhaps one of our suites would be more to your liking." Eliza leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I've read about room 13. I know it's not under renovation. If there's something you're not telling me, I'd like to hear it." The concierge shifted uncomfortably, glancing around as if ensuring they weren't overheard. After a long pause, he sighed and reached for the key. "You seem like someone who won't take no for an answer," he said, handing it to her. "But I must warn you, room 13 has a reputation. If you encounter anything unusual, I'll suggest you leave immediately." Eliza smiled, the thrill of the unknown coursing through her veins. "Thank you for the warning," she said. "I'll be fine." The corridor leading to room 13 was dimly lit, its faded red carpet muffling her footsteps. The brass key felt unusually cold in her hand, and as she approached the door, she noticed the faintest hum, like the distant sound of electricity. The door itself was unremarkable, dark wood with an engraved brass plaque bearing "Fee, number 13. Eliza inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked smoothly, and the door creaked open to reveal a room that was both ordinary and unsettling. A large bed with a heavy, carved headboard dominated the space, and a writing desk sat on the near the window. The wallpaper was faded, its once vivid floral pattern now muted and peeling at the edges, but it was the mirror that drew her attention. It hung on the wall opposite the bed, a tall oval frame of dark mahogany. The glass was pristine, almost unnaturally so, reflecting the room with a clarity that felt sharper than reality. Eliza set her bag on the bed and walked over to the mirror. She ran her fingers along the carved frame, noting the intricate patterns, spirals, and geometric shapes that seemed to shift under her touch. As she leaned in closer, she thought she saw movement in the reflection. But when she blinked, it was gone. Creepy, she muttered, pulling out her camera to take a few photos. As the flash illuminated the room, she caught something in the corner of the frame, a faint, shadowy figure standing near the writing desk. She spun around, but the room was empty. Eliza frowned, reviewing the photo. The figure was gone, replaced by Godoite. A figure was gone, replaced by a faint distortion, as if the image had been stretched. She set the camera down, her heart pounding. You wanted a story, she told herself. Here it is. Eliza decided to investigate further. She examined the desk, opening its drawers to find nothing but dust and a faint scent of mildew. The wardrobe was empty, save for a lone wire hanger that squeaked as it swung gently. The bed, when she lifted the heavy quilt, revealed nothing unusual, but the hum was getting louder. Its hum was getting louder. It wasn't coming from the walls or the floor, it was emanating from the mirror. Eliza approached it cautiously, the hair on the back of her neck standing on end. The surface of the glass seemed to ripple, as if it were water instead of a solid. Her reflection stared back at her, wide-eyed and pale, and then it smiled. Eliza stumbled backward, her breath catching in her throat. Her reflection remained in the mirror, watching her with an unsettling calmness. Slowly, it raised a hand and pressed it against the glass, and then, to her horror, the glass began to crack. Eliza stood frozen, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The cracking sound of the mirror echoed through the room, sharp and deliberate, as if something inside the glass was trying to break free. The surface of the mirror rippled like water disturbed by a pebble, distorting her reflection into something grotesque. The smile on her reflection's face widened unnaturally, stretching far beyond the boundaries of what was humanly possible. Its teeth glinted, sharp and glistening like shards of glass. Slowly, the reflection raised its other hand and tapped on the inside of the mirror. Lead. But her instinct screamed at her to move. She stumbled backward, tripping over her bag and landing hard on the floor. Her phone, which had been on the edge of the bed, slid across the wooden floorboards, the screen lighting up briefly. Before going dark again? This can't be happening, she whispered, her voice trembling. But it was. The room had changed. The air, once heavy with unease, now felt alive, pulsing with an energy that seemed to emanate from the mirror. The humming sound was louder now, vibrating through her bones. Eliza's eyes darted toward the door. It was still there, slightly ajar, but the corridor beyond it was no longer visible. Instead, there was only darkness, thick and impenetrable. As said, if the hallway had been swallowed whole, summoning every ounce of courage, Eliza pushed herself to her feet. She needed to think, to act. Her rational mind was struggling to make sense of what she was seeing, but the journalist in her clung to the idea that there had to be an explanation. She edged closer to the mirror, her eyes scanning its surface. The cracks had stopped spreading, but the ripples continued, distorting her reflection into strange and unsettling shapes. Her heart pounded as she reached out, her fingers hovering just inches from the glass. "Don't touch it," she muttered to herself, pulling her hand back. As she turned to retrieve her phone, a cold breeze brushed against her skin. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth and something metallic like rusted iron. Eliza spun around, her gaze snapping back to the mirror. The cracks were gone, the surface was smooth again, but her reflection. "It's you, or dearing, one day now, one or you." The cracks were gone, the canvas wasn't hers anymore. The figure in the mirror was no longer mimicking her movements. Instead, it stood perfectly still, staring at her with dark, hollow eyes, its head tilted to the side, almost inquisitively, and then it raised a finger to the, and then it raised a finger to its lips in a silent, shushing gesture. Okay, this is officially insane, Eliza said aloud, her voice shaking. She grabbed her phone from the floor, her fingers fumbling to unlock it. She needed light, anything to break the oppressive darkness that seemed to be closing in on her. As the flashlight on her phone illuminated the room, she noticed something she hadn't before. The wallpaper near the mirror was peeling, revealing an intricate pattern carved directly into the wood beneath. The carvings were faint but unmistakable geometric shapes that mirrored the designs on the mirror's frame. Eliza crouched down, running her fingers over the carvings. They felt ancient, the grooves worn smooth by time. She grabbed her camera and snapped a few photos, the flash briefly lighting up the room. When she reviewed the images, she noticed something chilling. In each photo, the carvings glowed faintly, as if responding to the light. This can't be right. She can't be right, muttered, her voice barely audible. What is this place? The humming grew louder, and Eliza felt a vibration under her feet. It wasn't just the floor, it was the entire room. She looked up and gasped. The walls were shifting. The peeling wallpaper began to curl inward, revealing more of the strange shape. Carvings beneath, they seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie light, as if alive. Her phone buzzed in her hand, the screen flickering before going black. No, 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 she whispered, shaking it in desperation. The light was her only source of comfort, and now it was gone. As the darkness pressed in around her, Eliza backed away from the mirror, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, and the faint metallic scent grew stronger. A sound broke through the hum, soft, almost melodic. It was a whisper, faint but distinct. Come closer. Eliza's blood ran cold. She whipped her head around, searching for the source of the voice, but there was no one else in the room. The mirror, however, seemed to shimmer, the ripples on its surface intensifying. The voice came again, louder this time. Eliza, her name, spoken in a voice that was both familiar and alien, sent a shiver down her spine. Who's there? She demanded, her voice cracking. The mirror responded, but not with words. The surface began to shift, the reflection fading until it showed something else entirely. A hallway appeared, dimly lit by flickering torches mounted on stone walls. The floor was uneven, made of ancient, cracked stone, and at the far end of the hallway stood a door, massive, ornate, and pulsing with a faint golden light. Eliza stared, her heart pounding. The mirror wasn't just reflecting, it was showing her something real, a place that existed somewhere else. No way, she whispered, shaking her head. This is impossible. But as she watched, the door at the end of the hallway creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. And then, as if drawn by an unseen force, she took a step toward the mirror. Eliza stopped just short of the mirror, her breath catching in her throat. The reflection, or rather, the portal seemed to beckon her, the golden light from the distant door pulsating in a hypnotic rhythm. The room around her felt colder, the temperature dropping with each passing second, but her curiosity burned hotter than her fear. Is this real? Oh, she muttered, reaching out hesitantly. Her fingers brushed against the glass, which was no longer smooth. It felt alive, pulsing faintly under her touch, warm like a living heartbeat. The moment her fingertips made contact, the room shifted again, the walls around her blurred, the carvings glowing brighter until they consumed her vision entirely. The ground beneath her feet vanished, and she felt the unsettling sensation of falling not fast, but slow and weightless, as though she changed shut, anxiety, a conwall all our days, as though she were and weightless, as though she were being drawn to the mirror itself. When the light faded, she found herself standing in the hallway she had seen moments ago. The stone walls were rough and ancient, lined with flickering torches that cast dancing shadows. The air was flickering torches that cast dancing shadows, with the scent of damp earth and something faintly metallic, and the sound of her own breathing echoed eerily in the confined space. "Okay, Eliza," she whispered to herself. "You've officially lost your mind." She turned back, expecting to see the portal that had brought her here, but there was nothing, just an unbroken stone wall. Her stomach sank. There was no going back, not yet. Gathering her courage, Eliza began to walk. Each step echoed loudly, the sound amplifying in theatered shops echoed loudly. Empty corridor. The golden light at the end of the hall grew brighter with each step, but so did her unease. The door, though magnificent, seemed almost alive, its intricate carvings shifting subtly as she approached. The designs on the door matched the ones she had seen in the hotel, the spirals and geometric patterns that seemed to twist and pulse with their own rhythm. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cool surface of the wood. It felt heavier than it looked, as though it held the weight of centuries. Before she could pull away, the door swung open on its own, revealing a vast chamber beyond. The room was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was cavernous, the ceiling disappearing into darkness high above. The floor was made of polished obsidian, reflecting the golden light of a massive floating orb that hovered at the center of the room. The orb pulsed faintly, its light casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to move independently of the room's features. Eliza took a cautious step forward, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. The air was warmer here, almost stifling, and carried an energy that prickled at her skin. She felt as though she were being watched, though the chamber appeared empty. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Is anyone here?" Her words hung in the air for a moment, before they were answered not by a voice, but by a faint whisper that seemed to emanate from the orb itself. "You shouldn't have come." Eliza froze, her heart pounding. The whisper was soft, but carried an edge of warning, as though it were both scolding her and pleading with her. She took another step closer to the orb, her curiosity outweighing her fear. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The orb pulsed brighter, the golden light intensifying until it was almost blinding. Shadows stretched across the walls, taking on shapes that resembled figures, tall, thin, and indistinct. The whisper came again, louder this time. "This is the Nexus, the bridge between worlds." Eliza frowned, her mind racing. "The bridge? Worlds? What are you talking about?" The shadows on the walls began to move, their shapes growing more defined. They weren't just figures, they were people, their faces contorted with fear and despair. They reached out, their hands stretching toward the orb, but they could not touch it. "This place is a trap," the whisper continued, growing louder. "A prison for those who seek too much." Eliza took a step back, her pulse quickening. "I didn't seek anything," she said. "I didn't mean to come here. She said, "I didn't mean to come here. I just—" hesitated, realizing how futile her words sounded. "I just wanted to know the truth." The orb flared again, its light revealing more of the chamber. The shadows on the walls twisted and writhed, their movement synchronized with the pulsating glow. The figures seemed to multiply, their faces filling the walls until there was no space left untouched. "The truth comes at a price," the whisper said, the tone colder now. "And you have already paid." Eliza's head swam. The oppressive energy of the room pressing down on her. She felt as though the air itself was trying to suffocate her, to push her out or pull her into. She couldn't tell which. She couldn't tell which. She couldn't tell which. She stumbled backward, her gaze darting around the chamber for an exit. There was none. "Okay, Eliza," she muttered to herself, her voice shaking. "You've gotten out of worse." Think. Her eyes landed on the orb again. It hovered silently, its surface smooth and glowing, coursing through her veins. She couldn't leave, not yet. There were too many questions, too many pieces of the puzzle she didn't understand. Summoning her courage, she stepped forward, reaching out toward the orb. The whisper returned, sharper this time. "Do not touch it." Eliza's hand froze mid-air, the whisper's warning echoing in her mind. "Do not touch it." Her instinct screamed at her to listen, to pull back and leave this place behind. But another part of her, the part that had driven her to room 13 in the first place, refused to back down. "I have to know," she murmured, her voice trembling but resolute. Taking a deep breath, she extended her hand once more. The closer her fingers came to the orb, the more the air around her seemed to vibrate, a low hum resonating through her bones. When her fingertips finally brushed its surface, a jolt of energy surged through her, sending her stumbling backward. The orb flared with blinding light, and the whispers became a cacophony of voices, dozens, maybe hundreds, all speaking at once. Eliza clutched her head, the noise overwhelming as the shadows on the walls began to move. The figures stepped away from the walls, their two-dimensional forms, stretching and twisting until they became fully three-dimensional. They surrounded her, their faces pale and emotionless, their hollow eyes fixed on her. "What? What are you?" Eliza stammered, backing away. The figures didn't answer. Instead, they parted to reveal a new shape emerging from the orb. It was humanoid, but its features were indistinct, shrouded in golden light. Its presence was both commanding and terrifying, and Eliza felt herself rooted to the spot, unable to move. The figure spoke, its voice calm but unyielding. "You have trespassed where you do not belong." "I didn't mean to," Eliza said quickly, her voice shaking. "I didn't know. You sought the unknown," the figure interrupted. "And now you face its consequences." The orb dimmed slightly, and the golden figure extended a hand. "This place is not for mortals. It is a nexus, a gateway between worlds, and it requires and balance. Those who enter must pay a price." Eliza shook her head, panic rising in her chest. "I didn't ask to come here. I just wanted to understand what was in room 13. The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "Room 13 is a threshold, a point of entry. You opened the door, knowing nothing of what lay beyond, and now the balance is disturbed." The figures around her began to close in, their movements slow but deliberate. The air grew colder, and the golden light of the orb cast long, distorted shadows across the chamber. "Wait," Eliza said, her voice rising. "There has to be a way out, a way to fix this." The golden figure hesitated, its hand lowering slightly. "The balance can be restored," it said slowly, "but the cost will be great." Eliza's mind raced. "What cost?" she asked. The figure gestured toward the orb. "The nexus must be stabilized. It requires a guardian, someone to protect it from those who would misuse its power, someone to keep the world separate." The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. "You mean me?" The figure nodded. "You are here now. The choice is yours. Take the mantle of guardian or return to your world and leave this place vulnerable." Eliza swallowed hard, her pulse pounding in her ears. "What happens if I go back?" The golden light flickered, and the figure's voice darkened. "The nexus will weaken. The barrier between worlds will erode, and the abyss will rise. Your world will fall into chaos. Her hands trembled as she considered the choice. She had trembled as she considered the choice. She had spent her entire career chasing mysteries, seeking out the unknown, but now, faced with the reality of what she had found, she wasn't sure she could bear the weight of it. "There's no other way?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The figure stepped closer, its glowing form towering over her. "There is no other way. The choice must be made." The shadows around her grew restless, their movements faster and more erratic. The orbit pulsed, its golden light flickering dangerously, and the hum in the air intensified. Time was running out. Eliza took a deep breath, her mind racing. She thought of her life back home, the people she loved, the stories she had yet to tell. If she stayed here, she would lose it all. But if she left, her gaze shifted to the orb, its light growing dimmer with each passing second. The nexus was falling apart, and she was the only one who could stop it. "I'll do it," she said finally. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I'll stay." The golden figure raised its hand, and the orb flared brighter than ever before. The shadows retreated, dissolving into the walls, and the hum in the air quieted. "Have chosen wisely," the figure said. "The nexus is safe." For now, as the light consumed her, Eliza felt her body begin to dissolve, her form merging with the golden glow of the orb. Her thoughts faded, replaced by a profound stillness, a sense of purpose that was both comforting and overwhelming. And then there was silence. The Crimson Haven Hotel remained as it always had, its opulent halls and eerie corridors a mystery to those who entered. Room 13 was sealed once again. It's sealed once again. It's sealed once again. It's sealed. Key hanging behind the concierge's desk, waiting for the next curious soul to open the door. The end, or perhaps the beginning. The silence was deafening, an unnatural stillness that pressed heavily on Eliza's senses as her consciousness flickered back to life. She found herself standing once again in the vast chamber, but everything had changed. The golden orb now pulsed faintly, its once dominant light reduced to a fragile glow. The figures that had once surrounded her were gone, leaving her utterly alone. But was she truly alone? The air was thick, alive with an energy that hummed faintly beneath the surface. Eliza turned in slow circles, her eyes scanning the chamber for any sign of movement. The walls, previously carved with intricate geometric designs, now appeared smoother, almost organic, as though the chamber itself was a living entity. "I made the choice," she said aloud, her voice trembling slightly. "I chose to stay. So why does it feel like nothing's changed?" Her question hung in the air, unanswered. The orb flickered weakly, its light casting long, uneven shadows across the obsidian floor. Eliza approached it cautiously, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. As she reached out to touch its surface, a sharp voice cut through the silence. "Do not touch it." Eliza froze, her hand hovering inches from the orb. She turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows, a woman, her form wrapped in flowing iridescent robes that shimmered like liquid gold. Her face was partially obscured by a hood, but her piercing eyes locked onto Eliza with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Who are you?" Eliza asked, stepping back from the orb. The woman raised a hand, palm outward, as though to calm her. "I am the keeper," she said, "the guardian of this place. Or at least, I was." Eliza frowned. "Was? What do you mean?" The keeper sighed, her expression unreadable. "You made the choice to stay, to take my place, but the Nexus is not so easily controlled. It must accept you, just as you must accept it." A cold chill ran down Eliza's spine. Accept me? Eh? What does that mean? The keeper gestured toward the orb. The Nexus is alive, a bridge between worlds. It is ancient and sentient, and it does not yield its power lightly. If it deems you unworthy, it will reject you. Eliza's heart pounded. And if it rejects you, me? The keeper's silence was answer enough. The orb flickered again, its light dimming further. The hum in the air grew louder, vibrating through Eliza's chest. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and cracks began to spread across the obsidian floor, thin lines of light seeping through. You must prove yourself, the keeper said, her tone grave. The Nexus will test you. Before Eliza could respond, the ground gave way beneath her. She let out a scream as she plunged into the thick darkness, the golden light of the chamber fading into nothingness. When Eliza opened her eyes, she found herself in a completely different place. She was standing in a dense forest, the trees towering above her, their gnarled branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sky. The air was damp and heavy, filled with the sound of rustling leaves and distant whispers. The forest was alive, but not in the way a forest should be. The trees seemed to move subtly, their trunks twisting and to move subtly, their trunks twisting and bending as though they were watching her. Shadows flitted between the trees, too quick to be seen clearly. What is this place? Eliza murmured, turning in a slow circle. A voice answered, soft and melodic. The first test. Eliza spun around, but there was no one there. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. What kind of test? She demanded. The kind that reveals who you truly are. The shadows began to converge, their movements growing more deliberate. As they came closer, Eliza could make out their forms humanoid, but distorted, their faces featureless and their loss, limbs elongated. They moved with a fluid grace, circling her like predators. Eliza's breath came in quick gasps as she backed away, her eyes darting between the figures. What do you want from me? She shouted. One of the figures stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. When it spoke, its voice was identical to hers. What do you want from yourself? The question caught her off guard. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? The figure tilted its head, its featureless face somehow conveying a sense of curiosity. You came here seeking answers. You sought the unknown, driven by a need you do not understand. But what did you hope to find? Eliza shook her head, her hands trembling. I don't know. I wanted to understand. The figures began to shift, their forms becoming clearer. They were her. Each one was a different version of herself, her as a child, clutching a broken version of herself, her as a child, clutching a broken toy, her as a teenager, her face twisted with anger, her as an adult, standing tall but with eyes filled with doubt. They surrounded her, their voices blending into a single unified chorus. You cannot face the Nexus until you face yourself. The forest seemed to close in around her, the trees leaning closer, their branches intertwining like skeletal fingers. The air grew colder, and the whispers grew louder, echoing inside her mind. Eliza fell to her knees, clutching her head. Stop! She screamed. Just stop! The shadows froze, their voices silencing. The forest became deathly still, the air heavy with anticipation. One of the figures stepped forward, its form solidifying into a perfect replica of Eliza. It knelt before her, its eyes locking onto Carol Pearsy as ears would Carol say hers. You must choose, it said. Do you embrace what you are, or do you deny it? Eliza stared at the figure, her mind racing. The question was simple, but the answer felt impossibly complex. She had spent her entire life chasing mysteries, seeking out the unknown, but she had never stopped to ask herself why. What was she running from? What was she hoping to find? Taking a deep breath, She looked into the figure's eyes and whispered, "I choose to embrace it." The figure smiled, and the forest dissolved into light. The light enveloped Eliza, warm and blinding, before fading to reveal a new landscape. She now stood on the edge of an enormous cliff, overlooking a swirling void of golden and black clouds. The air was thin and cold, whipping at her hair and clothes as she struggled to steady herself against the gusts of wind. Ahead of her was a narrow stone bridge, its surface cracked and ancient. The bridge extended into the void, disappearing into the horizon. Hovering just beyond the edge of her vision, a faint structure loomed, something massive and intricate, cloaked in the same golden glow as the orb. Eliza hesitated. The bridge looked fragile, like it might crumble under her weight, but it was the only path forward. The second test, a voice echoed, low and resonant. It wasn't melodic like the one in the forest, but commanding and firm. "Cross the bridge, if you dare." Eliza's heart pounded as she stepped forward. The first stone wobbled slightly under her foot, and a shiver of fear coursed through her. She forced herself to take another step, then another. Below her, the swirling void seemed alive, tendrils of black smoke reaching upward as though trying to grasp her. "Why are you here?" the voice demanded, its tone sharp. "What drives you to face this trial?" Eliza clenched her fists, her knuckles white. "I told you I want to understand. I want to know the truth." "The truth," the voice replied, almost mocking. "And what will you do when you find it? Will you accept it, or will it destroy you?" She didn't answer, her focus entirely on the bridge. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of the void pulling at her like gravity. The structure groaned under her, the cracks widening as pieces of stone crumbled into the abyss. Below, halfway across the bridge, the wind grew stronger, howling like a living thing. Shadows began to rise from the void, taking on familiar shapes, people she had known, places she had been. They were memories, but twisted and distorted. Their edges blurred and their colors wrong. Eliza froze as one of the shapes stepped onto the bridge ahead of her. It was her father, or at least something that looked like him. His face was pale and sunken, his eyes dark and hollow. "Why did you leave?" the figure asked, its voice trembling with sorrow. "You could have stayed. We needed you." Eliza's throat tightened. She hadn't seen her father in years, not since she had left home to chase her dreams. "You're not real?" she said. Her voice shaking. "You're just another trick." The figure stepped closer, its features twisting into something grotesque. "You abandoned us," it hissed, its voice no longer her father's. "You chose yourself over your family." Eliza gritted her teeth, forcing herself to move forward. The figure dissolved into smoke as she passed, but more shapes emerged: her mother, her childhood best friend, an ex-lover. Each one spoke, their voices filled with accusations and pain. "You were never enough. You failed me. You'll never find what you're looking for." The words cut deep, but Eliza pushed through, her determination stronger than her doubt. She kept her eyes on the distant glow, refusing to look back. The bridge began to crumble behind her, the stones falling away into the void. She broke into a run, her breath coming in ragged gasps as the path ahead narrowed. The shadows lunged at her, their voices rising into a deafening cacophony. But she didn't stop. When she finally reached the end of the bridge, the glow engulfed her, silencing the chaos. She collapsed to her knees, her body trembling with exhaustion. The air here was different, calm, still, and filled with an otherworldly warmth. As she looked up, she saw the structure she had glimpsed from the cliff. It was a massive, spiraling tower, its walls made of shimmering crystal and etched with glowing patterns. At its center was another orb, larger than the one in the chamber. Its center was another orb, larger than the one in the chamber. It sat, light, steady, and serene. You have done well, the voice said, softer now. But your journey is not yet complete. Eliza pushed herself to her feet. Her legs shaky. What more do you want from me? She asked, her voice hoarse. The voice didn't answer directly. Instead, the tower's door opened, revealing a staircase that spiraled upward into the unknown. Eliza hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. But there was no turning back. The bridge was gone. The cliff was a memory, and the void below offered no salvation. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the tower. The air inside was warmer, but it carried a faint hum, like the sound of distant machinery. The staircase seemed endless, each step taking her higher and higher into the structure. As she climbed, the walls began to shift, displaying scenes from her life. They weren't just memories. They were moments she had forgotten, or perhaps chosen to forget. Her first failure as a journalist, the friend she had pushed away, the promise she had broken. What do you see? The voice asked, echoing in the stairwell. My mistakes, Eliza said quietly. All the things I've tried to leave behind. And what will you do with them? The voice pressed. Will you carry them forward, or will you let them go? Eliza stopped, her hand resting on the railing. I can't change the past, she said, but I can try to do better. The walls shimmered, the images dissolving into light. The staircase ended abruptly, leading to a platform at the top of the tower. The orb floated at its center, its golden glow steady and inviting. This is the final test, the voice said. To accept the light, you must embrace the darkness within yourself. Only then can you restore the balance. Eliza stepped forward, her heart pounding. The orb pulsed faintly, its light casting long shadows across the platform. She reached out, her fingers brushing its surface. The light engulfed her, and the world disappeared. Eliza's vision was consumed by a golden light, a blinding radiance that seemed to seep into her very being. For a moment, she felt weightless, suspended in the vast expanse of nothingness. The hum that had accompanied her since entering the Nexus was gone, replaced by an eerie silence. And then, she heard it, a faint whisper, distant yet familiar. Eliza. The voice echoed, growing louder with each repetition. It wasn't the cold, commanding voice of the Nexus, nor the melodic tone of the Keeper. It was her own voice, layered over itself in a haunting chorus. Eliza, Eliza, Eliza. She opened her eyes to find herself standing in a new place, an endless white void stretching infinitely in every direction. There was no ground, yet she stood firm. Walls, yet the space felt confined, and directly in front of her stood herself. The figure was identical in every way, down to the smudge of dirt on her cheek and the slight tear in her jacket. But its eyes were different. They glowed, faintly like embers smoldering in the darkness. Who are you? Eliza demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The figure smiled, a slow, deliberate motion. I'm you, it said, the part of you that you've tried to bury, the doubts, the fears, the truths you refuse to face. Eliza took a step back, her breath quickening. This is another trick, another test. The figure tilted its head, its smile widening. It's not a trick, Eliza. It's the truth. You can't move forward without confronting me. The white void shifted, rippling like light void shifted, rippling like light void shifted. Water. Scenes from Eliza's life began to materialize around her, vivid and sharp. She saw herself as a child, sitting alone in her room, clutching a worn teddy bear, as her parents argued in the next room. She saw herself as a teenager. standing on the edge of a crowd, desperate to fit in, but too afraid to speak. She saw herself as an adult, chasing story after story, always running, always searching. "Why do you keep running?" the figure asked, its voice soft but insistent. "I'm not running," Eliza snapped. "I'm trying to find answers." The figure stepped closer, its glowing eyes locking onto hers. "Are you? Or are you just trying to fill the void?" Eliza's hands clenched into fists. "I don't have to explain myself to you." "You don't," the figure agreed. "But you can't lie to me. I'm you. Remember?" The scenes around her shifted again, faster now. She saw the faces of people she had hurt, relationships she had abandoned, opportunities she had missed. The images were relentless, each one a sharp reminder of the weight she carried. "You think you're searching for the truth," the figure said, circling her slowly. "But the truth you're really looking for is in here." It tapped its chest, right where Eliza's heart would be. Eliza turned away, her jaw tight. "I faced my mistakes. I've owned up to them. What more do you want from me?" "I want you to stop running," the figure said. "To stop hiding. To accept that you can't find peace out there until you find it in here." The words hit her like a physical blow, knocking the breath from her lungs. She had always prided herself on her courage, her determination, her relentless pursuit of the unknown. But now, faced with the unflinching truth of her own reflection, she realized how much of her life had been spent avoiding the things she couldn't control. Tears welled in her eyes, and she wiped them away angrily. "I don't know how," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to stop." The figure smiled again, but this time it was gentle, almost compassionate. "You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to take the first step." The void began to shift again, the images fading into light. The figure extended its hand, and Eliza hesitated before reaching out. When their hands met, a surge of warmth flooded through her, and the figure dissolved into golden particles that surrounded her like a cocoon. The white void darkened, and Eliza found herself back in the chamber at the top of the tower. The orb hovered in front of her, its light steady and strong. The air felt different now, calmer, more balanced. She could feel the power of the nexus flowing through her, no longer oppressive but harmonious. "You have faced yourself," the voice of the nexus said. "Softer now. And you have proven worthy." Eliza stepped closer to the orb, her hand hovering just above its surface. "What happens now?" she asked. "You take your place as guardian," the voice replied. "You will watch over the nexus, ensuring the balance is maintained. And in return, you will know its secrets." Eliza hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. But this time, she didn't feel fear. She felt clarity, a sense of purpose she had never known before. "I'm ready," she said. The orb pulsed once, and its light engulfed her. She felt herself becoming part of it, her body dissolving into energy, her mind expanding to encompass the vastness of the nexus. She saw worlds beyond her own, connected by fragile threads, and she understood her role in protecting them. As the light faded, the chamber returned to stillness. The orb returned to stillness. The orb remained, its glow steady and unwavering, and within it, Eliza watched over the nexus, a part of the balance she had sought all her life. The light surrounding Eliza did not vanish entirely. Instead, it dimmed to a gentle glow, illuminating a chamber that seemed both infinite and intimate. She found herself floating, not weightless, but as if the ground itself had become soft and malleable. The golden orb remained before her, its presence more commanding than ever, but now it pulsed in sync with her heartbeat. Eliza felt connected, The voice of the Nexus returned, but this time it was no longer disembodied. It resonated from within her, a deep, layered tone that felt like her own thoughts amplified. You have taken their thoughts amplified? First step, Eliza, but the role of the guardian is not chosen lightly. There is one final truth you must face, she frowned, her earlier clarity wavering. I've faced myself. I've accepted the balance. What else is there? The orb dimmed further, and the chamber shifted again. The walls dissolved into a star-filled expanse, vast and cold, with threads of golden light weaving between the stars. It was breathtaking, a cosmic tapestry that seemed to stretch into eternity. You are connected to everything, the Nexus explained. To the threads that bind worlds, to the life and energy that flows through them. To protect the Nexus, you must understand its cost. A golden thread unwound itself from the thick orb, floating toward Eliza. It hovered before her, its glow soft and inviting. Without thinking, she reached out to touch it. The moment her fingers brushed the thread, her mind was overwhelmed with sensations. She was no longer in the sensations chamber. She was everywhere. She stood in a bustling marketplace in a world with two suns, the air filled with the scent of strange spices and the hum of alien voices. She walked along the shores of an endless ocean under a violet sky, the waves lapping at her feet. She ran through a dense jungle teeming with bioluminescent plants, their glow casting an ethereal light on her path. Each place was alive, vibrant, and interconnected, and in every one, she felt the presence of the Nexus, a constant hum that underpinned all existence. But then the visions changed. The vibrant worlds faded, replaced by scenes of decay and destruction. She saw a city engulfed in flames, its inhabitants fleeing from shadowy creatures that emerged from the cracks in the ground. She saw a barren wasteland where nothing grew, the sky darkened by ash and smoke. She saw a village consumed by darkness, its people crying out for help as they were swallowed by the void. These are the worlds that the void have fallen, the Nexus said, its voice heavy with sorrow. This is what happens when the balance is broken. Eliza's heart ached at the sight. Why didn't the Nexus stop it? Why didn't the Nexus stop it? She asked, her voice trembling. It could not. The balance requires a guardian, a bridge between the Nexus and the worlds it protects. Without one, the threads unravel and chaos reigns. The golden thread before her shimmered, its light growing brighter. You must decide, Eliza, the Nexus continued. Will you take the place of those who came before? Will you become the guardian and hold the balance steady? Eliza hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She had seen the beauty of the connected worlds, but also their fragility. To become the guardian meant sacrificing everything she had ever known her life, her freedom, her humanity. But to refuse meant condemning countless worlds to ruin. Her hand trembled as she reached for the thread again. What happens to me if I take this role? She asked. You will become one with the Nexus, the voice replied. You will exist beyond time and space, bound to the threads that connect all worlds. You will see everything, know everything, but you will no longer be Eliza. The words struck her like a physical blow. No longer me? You will transcend, the Nexus said simply. But your essence will remain, woven into the balance. Eliza stared at the thread, her mind racing. She thought of her life, her small apartment filled with books and souvenirs, the friends she had drifted away from, the family she had left behind. She thought of the stories she had chased, the mysteries she had uncovered, the thrill of the unknown that had always driven her forward. Was she ready to give all that up to become something greater, but at the cost of her identity? "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered. The thread pulsed softly, as if in response to her doubt. "The choice is yours, Eliza. It has always been yours." The golden light around her began to fade, the star-filled expanse darkening into fade, the star-filled expanse darkening into shadows. The thread remained, glowing faintly, its light the only anchor in the void. Eliza closed her eyes, her thoughts spiraling. She could feel the weight of the worlds pressing on her, the hum of the nexus resonating deep within her chest. The choice was terrifying, but she knew the alternative was far worse. Taking a deep breath, she opened her eyes and reached for the thread. This time, she didn't hesitate. As her fingers closed around it, the thread dissolved into all light, wrapping around her and pulling her into the orb. She felt herself merging with the nexus, her thoughts expanding, her senses stretching across time and space. She was everywhere and nowhere, connected to everything and everyone, and then there was peace. Back at the Crimson Haven Hotel, the key to room 13 hung silently on its hook, waiting for the next seeker to open the door. The concierge glanced at it briefly, a flicker of unease crossing his face before he turned away. Far above, in the nexus, Eliza watched over the threads, her presence now eternal. She was no longer Eliza Harrington, but the guardian of the balance, the bridge between worlds. And for the first time in her life, she felt whole. Eliza's newfound sense of peace was short-lived. As she settled into the nexus, feeling its power pulse through her, she became aware of something wrong. The golden threads that connected the worlds were trembling, vibrating with an energy that didn't feel harmonious. The hum of the nexus grew louder, sharper, like a warning siren. "Eliza." The voice of the nexus spoke again, its tone urgent. "Something approaches." Her connection to the threads allowed her to see it, a darkness creeping along the golden pathways, devouring the light as it moved. It was unlike anything she had encountered, an entity made of pure void, its presence a direct assault on the balance. "What is that?" she asked, panic rising in her voice. "The abyss," the nexus replied, its tone grim. "A force that has existed since the beginning of time. Opposing the light, it feeds on imbalance, growing stronger with each weakened world." Eliza focused on the threads, watching as the darkness spread. It moved with purpose, targeting worlds closest to the nexus first. She could feel the fear and desperation of the beings in those worlds as their light dimmed, their existence teetering on the edge of oblivion. "I thought I stabilized the balance," she said, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Why is this still happening?" "The balance is not static," the nexus explained. "It is a constant struggle, and the guardian must fight to maintain it. The abyss grows bold when it senses weakness." Eliza's fists clenched. She had chosen this role, accepted the sacrifice. She had chosen this role, accepted the sacrifice. And yet the danger was far from over. "Then, tell me what to do. How do I stop it?" The nexus hesitated, its light dimming. To confront the abyss is to risk everything. Even a guardian may not survive such an encounter. Eliza's determination hardened. "I didn't come this far just to watch worlds fall apart. Show me the way," the nexus responded, opening a pathway, a swirling vortex of golden and black light that led directly into the heart of the darkness. The threads quivered as the pathway formed, their energy surging in protest. "You must be careful. Thee must be careful. Thee," Nexus warned. "The abyss will test you more than anything you have faced before." It knows your fears, your doubts, and it will use them against you. Eliza took a deep breath, steeling herself. Let it try. As she stepped into the vortex. Steeling herself, let it try. As she stepped into the vortex, the sensation was unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was as if she were being pulled apart and reassembled at the same time, her essence stretched across dimensions. When the light faded, she found herself standing in a vast, empty void. The space was cold and oppressive, the air thick with a suffocating silence ahead of her. The abyss took shape, a massive, swirling mass of shadow, its edges flickering like flames. Within its depths, faint golden lights flickered, the remnants of the worlds it had consumed. Eliza, it spoke, its voice 1,000 whispers blending into one. You are bold to come here. She squared her shoulders, refusing to let the fear show on her face. I'm here to stop you. The abyss laughed, a sound that echoed endlessly. Stop me. You cannot stop what has always been. You are nothing but a flicker of light, destined to fade. The shadows around her began to move, forming shapes, twisted, distorted versions of people she recognized. Her parents, their faces etched with disappointment. Her former mentor, his eyes cold and accusing. Even her own reflection, warped and grotesque, stepped forward. Do you think you are worthy of this role? The abyss taunted. Do you think you can bear the weight of the balance? You are weak, Eliza, a failure. The shadows closed in, their voices growing louder, overlapping into a deafening roar. Eliza's heart raced, her hands trembling as doubt clawed at her mind. But then she remembered the forest, the bridge, the tower. She had faced herself before, and she had emerged stronger. She wouldn't let the abyss win. You're wrong, she said, her voice steady. I'm not weak. I'm not a failure. I'm here because I choose to be, and I won't let you destroy everything. The shadows hesitated, their forms flickering as her conviction pushed back against them. Eliza focused on the golden thread still visible within the abyss, their light faint but resilient. She reached out, feeling their airy energy, and willed them to grow stronger. The abyss roared, its form twisting violently. You cannot defy me. You are nothing. Eliza gritted her teeth, her hands glowing with the light of the nexus. I am the guardian, she said, her voice ringing out like a bell. And you will not win. The light surged from her, a brilliant wave that pushed back the shadows and pierced the heart of the abyss. The golden threads flared to life, their light burning away the darkness. The abyss writhed, its form collapsing under the weight of her power. As the void began to dissolve, Eliza felt the energy of the nexus envelop her once more. The threads repaired themselves, their light steady and unyielding. The worlds she had seen teetering on the edge of destruction began to recover, their balance restored. The voice of the nexus returned, calm and steady. You have done what many could not. The abyss has been pushed back, and the balance is safe. For now, Eliza nodded, exhaustion washing over her. Will it return? Yes, the nexus replied. The struggle between light and dark is eternal, but so is the strength of the guardian. She smiled faintly, the weight of her role settling over her like a comforting mantle. Then I'll be ready. As the void faded, she found herself back in the chamber, the orb glowing brighter than ever. Eliza stood tall, her connection to the nexus stronger than ever before. She was the guardian, the protector of the balance, and she would face whatever came next. Eliza stood in the chamber, her body humming with the residual energy of the nexus. The orb floated silently before her, its glow steady and reassuring, but the battle with the abyss had left her shaken, her thoughts swirling with questions. She sang, "At Creusius foreign word and bragging," couldn't yet answer. The calm didn't last. A faint tremor ran through the floor, followed by another, stronger this time. The light of the orb flickered, its golden glow dimming as the tremors grew more violent. Eliza steadied herself, heart pounding. "What now?" she muttered, her voice barely audible. The voice of the Nexus returned, its tone sharper than before. "The balance has shifted again. The abyss was not defeated, it was weakened, and now it retaliates." Eliza's stomach tightened. "What do I need to do?" The Nexus hesitated. "There is another path," it said, final. "A deeper layer of the Nexus, where the threads converge. It is there you must go to strengthen the connection and stabilize the balance." The chamber began to change around her, the walls dissolving into mist. The floor beneath her feet shimmered, and she felt herself being pulled downward, as though the Nexus itself was guiding her to its core. When the mist cleared, she found herself in a labyrinthine space unlike anything she had seen before. The walls were made of light, constantly shifting and flowing like liquid, and the air was filled with a low, vibrating hum. Golden threads crisscrossed the space, forming a web of energy that pulsed with faint light. Eliza stepped forward, her boots clicking softly on the crystalline floor. The labyrinth seemed alive, its pathways shifting and rearranging as she moved. "This place," she murmured. "What is it?" "The convergence," the Nexus replied. "The heart of the threads. It is here that the balance can be fortified." "But it's a maze," Eliza said, glancing at the ever-shifting walls. "How am I supposed to find my way?" The Nexus did not answer, but the threads above her began to glow brighter, forming a faint path through the labyrinth. Eliza followed them cautiously, her senses on high alert. The air here was heavy, charged with energy, and every step she took seemed to reverberate through the space. As she rounded a corner, she heard it, a low growl, deep and guttural. She froze, her heart racing. The sound came again, closer this time, echoing off the walls of the labyrinth. "Eliza, the Thayu," Nexus warned, its voice urgent. "You are not alone." She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the shifting pathways, and then she saw a creature emerging from the shadows. It was massive, its form twisted and unnatural, with elongated limbs and glowing red eyes that burned like embers. The creature snarled, its teeth glinting in the dim light, and lunged toward her. Eliza dove out of the way, the creature's claws narrowly missing her. She scrambled to her feet, her back pressed against one of the shifting walls as the beast turned to face her. It moved with an unnatural grace, its body flowing like smoke, and its gaze locked onto her with predatory intent. "What is that?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "A fragment of the abyss," the Nexus replied. "It seeks to disrupt the balance by destroying the Guardian." "Well, that's comforting," Eliza muttered, dodging another swipe from the creature's claws. She needed a plan. The threads above her still glowed, their light forming a path through the labyrinth, but the creature blocked her way forward. She glanced around, searching for anything she could use to her advantage. Her eyes landed on a cluster of threads nearby, their light flickering faintly. An idea formed in her mind. Eliza darted toward the threads, the creature hot on her heels. She reached out, her fingers brushing the glowing strands, and felt a surge of energy course through her. The threads responded to her touch, their light growing brighter and more intense. The creature hesitated, its movement slowing as the light overwhelmed it. Eliza seized the moment, pulling the threads toward her and channeling their energy into a blinding burst of light. The creature let out a piercing shriek, its form dissolving into shadows that were quickly absorbed by the labyrinth. The air grew still once more, and the threads around her pulsed with renewed strength. "Impressive," the Nexus said, its tone almost approving. "But the path ahead is long, and the challenges will only grow." Eliza wiped the sweat from her brow, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. Yeah, I figured as much. She turned back to the glowing path, her resolve hardening. The labyrinth stretched endlessly before her, but she would see this through. She had to, as she continued deeper into the convergence. The threads around her began to hum softly, their light growing warmer and more inviting. But the air remained heavy, and the sense of unease lingered. Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that the labyrinth was watching her, testing her, just as the Nexus had warned. And as she moved further into its depths, she knew the true battle was only just beginning. Eliza pressed on, the labyrinth stretching endlessly before her. Each corner she turned revealed new challenges, walls that shifted into dead ends, glowing threads that flickered as if testing her determination, and shadows that lingered just beyond her peripheral vision. The air grew denser the further she ventured, and the humming sound of the threads grew louder, almost deafening. It was as if the labyrinth itself was alive, observing her, waiting for her to falter. The path ahead split into two, one glowing brightly with golden light, the other shrouded in shadow. Eliza hesitated, her instincts warring with her logic. Safe, but something about it felt wrong. What's the trick here? She muttered, scanning both roads. A faint laugh echoed through the labyrinth, low and mocking. It wasn't the voice of the Nexus, but something darker, more sinister. Not everything is as it seems, the voice taunted. Choose wisely. Guardian, your fate and theirs depends on it. Eliza's hands clenched into fists. You're just another fragment of the abyss, she said aloud. You're trying to manipulate me. Perhaps, the voice replied, its tone amused. Or perhaps I'm mused, the only truth you'll find here. The glow of the golden path brightened, almost blinding, while the shadowed path seemed to pull her in with an unsettling stillness. Eliza took a deep breath, closing her eyes to shut out the distractions. She shut out the distractions, let the energy of the threads guide her, feeling for the balance they represented. When she opened her eyes, she turned toward the shadowed path. The air grew colder as she stepped into the darkness, her footsteps echoing loudly. The shadows seemed to close in around her, pressing against her skin like a living force. But the golden threads above her remained steady, their faint light guiding her forward. Clever, the voice said, no longer mocking. But the labyrinth will not yield so easily. As if in response, the ground beneath her feet began to shift. The crystalline floor cracked, and long tendrils of shadow emerged, twisting and writhing like snakes. Eliza leapt back, narrowly avoiding one as it lashed out toward her. Of course, she muttered, her pulse quickening. Why wouldn't the labyrinth try to kill me? The tendrils moved with terrifying speed, striking at her from all directions. Eliza dodged and weaved, her movements growing more desperate as the attacks intensified. One tendril caught her ankle, pulling her off balance and sending her off, crashing to the ground. Pain shot through her leg, but she forced herself to move, clawing at the floor as the tendril tightened its grip. Her fingers brushed against one of the glowing threads, and she instinctively grabbed hold of it. The thread flared with light, burning away the shadowy tendril in an instant. Eliza scrambled to her feet, gripping the thread tightly as the other tendrils hesitated. The light seemed to repel them, and she used it to push forward, swinging the thread like a whip to clear her path. The shadowed path finally opened into a vast chamber, its walls lined with threads that pulsed faintly. In the center of the room stood another figure, this one cloaked in darkness, its form barely visible. Its presence radiated power, and the air around it seemed to vibrate with tension. Guardian, the figure said, its voice a deep rumble. You have come far, but your journey ends here. Eliza tightened her grip on the glowing thread. Her her eyes narrowing. I've come too far to stop now. The figure stepped forward, its form solidifying. It was humanoid but twisted, its limbs elongated and its face obscured by a swirling void. You cannot defeat me, it said. I am the abyss, Matus, made flesh. I am the darkness that lies within all things. Eliza took a step forward, the thread in her hand glowing brighter. You're just another test, she said, and I have passed every one so far. The abyss laughed, a sound that shook the chamber. You think this is a test? This is the end, Guardian. You cannot destroy the darkness without destroying yourself. The figure lunged, its form dissolving into a mass of shadows that surged toward Eliza. She swung the glowing thread, its light cutting through the darkness, but the shadows reformed almost instantly, circling her like a predator stalking its prey. You cannot win. The abyss taunted, its voice echoing from all directions. The light is fleeting, the darkness is eternal. Eliza's mind raced as she dodged the attacks, the thread in her hand flickering with each strike. She could feel the energy of the labyrinth, the golden threads surrounding her, and the hum of the nexus resonating within her. The balance, that was the key. She closed her eyes, focusing on the connection she had forged with the nexus. She didn't need to fight the darkness, she needed to embrace it. As the shadows closed in, Eliza opened her arms, letting the thread fall from her grasp, engulfed her, cold and suffocating. But she didn't resist. Instead, she reached out with her mind, connecting to the abyss the way she had connected to the threads. The shadows hesitated, their movements slowing. The abyss spoke, its voice vague, its voice uncertain. What are you doing? I'm not fighting you, Eliza said, her voice steady. I'm accepting you. The balance isn't about defeating the darkness, it's about coexisting with it. The chamber filled with light as the golden threads flared to life, their glow weaving through the shadows. The abyss roared, its form unraveling as the light intertwined with the darkness, creating a perfect harmony. When the light faded, Eliza stood alone in the chamber. The air was still, the hum of the nexus calm and steady. The threads above her pulsed with a soft golden glow, their energy stronger than ever. You have done it, the nexus said, its voice filled with quiet reverence. The balance is restored. Eliza took a deep breath, the weight of the breath, the weight of death settling over her. She had faced the abyss and emerged stronger, not by defeating it, but by understanding it. She looked up at the threads, their light reflecting in her eyes. I'm ready, she said softly. Whatever comes next. I'm ready, she said softly. Whatever comes next. I'm ready. As Eliza stood in the chamber, the threads glowing steadily above her, she felt a newfound strength coursing through her veins. The labyrinth was silent now, its challenges momentarily subdued. But she knew this peace was fragile. Nexus had taught her that balance was not a state of being, but a continuous effort, a battle that would never truly end. The voice of the Nexus returned, softer this time, like a whisper carried on the wind. You have done what many could not. You faced the abyss and embraced the balance. But there is more yet to see, more yet to protect. Eliza turned, her gaze sweeping the chamber. The walls shifted, revealing glimpses of other worlds, vivid landscapes bathed in light and shadow. She saw vast cities with towers that reached the clouds, endless forests alive with creatures she couldn't name, and barren wastelands where the air shimmered with heat. Each world was unique, yet connected by the golden threads that pulsed with life. What do I do now? She asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty that lingered in her heart. You walk the threads, the Nexus replied. You become their keeper, their protector. Your journey has only just begun. Before she could respond, the chamber dissolved around her. The floor beneath her feet melted into light, and she felt herself pulled upward, her body weightless as she was carried into the heart of the nexus. The threads surrounded her, their light enveloping her like a cocoon, and she closed her eyes as the energy flowed through her. When she opened them again, she was standing on a bridge made entirely of golden light. The bridge stretched endlessly in both directions, suspended in a star-filled void. Each step she took resonated with a faint hum, the threads beneath her feet pulsating in rhythm with her heartbeat. The air here was different, calm, yet charged with potential. She could feel the weight of the worlds connected to the nexus, their energy flowing through her. But she could also sense the fragility of that connection, the constant push and pull of forces that threatened to unbalance the scales. As she walked, she began to see figures on the bridge. They were faint at first, little more than shadows, but as she approached, they grew clearer. Each one was tethered to a golden thread, their forms flickering like candlelight. Eliza stopped in front of the nearest figure, a young woman with wide, fearful eyes. Thread connected to her pulsed weakly, its light dim and unsteady. "What's wrong with her?" Eliza asked, turning to the nexus. "She is a soul caught between worlds," the voice replied. "Her thread is frayed, her connection to the balance weakened." Eliza knelt beside the figure, reaching out to touch the thread. The moment her fingers brushed it, she was flooded with images, memories of the young woman's life. She saw her struggles, her fears, her hopes. She felt the weight of her choices, the pain of her losses, and the fragile spark of light that still burned within her. "You can mend her thread," the nexus said, "but it will take a piece of your own light to do so." Eliza hesitated, the enormity of the task sinking in. She had already given so much: her life, her freedom, her identity. But as she had already given so much: her life, her freedom, her identity. Looked into the woman's eyes, she knew she couldn't turn away. "Show me how," she said. The nexus guided her, its voice calm and steady. Eliza focused on the golden thread, channeling her energy into its frayed edges. The thread began to glow brighter, its light growing steadier as it reconnected to the balance. The young woman's form solidified, her eyes filling with life as she smiled at Eliza. "Thank you," the woman whispered before fading into light. Eliza stood. Her legs stood, trembling from the effort. She turned back to the bridge, where more figures had appeared, their threads flickering like dying embers. "This is my purpose now, isn't it?" she said softly. "To mend the threads, to protect the balance." "Yes," the nexus replied, "but you are not alone. The light of the threads will guide you, and the strength of the balance will sustain you." Eliza took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the endless bridge before her. The journey would be long, and the challenges unrelenting, but she was ready. With each step, the bridge stretched further into the void, its light unwavering, and Eliza, the guardian of the nexus, walked on. Eliza pressed onward, each step on the luminous bridge resonating with the hum of the golden threads. The stars around her seemed to shift and pulse, responding to her presence. Responding to her presence. Could feel the enormity of her task weighing down on her. Every thread she walked was a world, a life, a story waiting to be preserved. She was no longer just herself. She was the keeper of countless destinies. The figures tethered to the threads became more frequent now. Some looked hopeful, their light faint but intact. Others appeared fractured, their forms flickering like dying flames. Eliza stopped at each one, her hands working tirelessly to mend the frayed connections. Each repair left her weaker, her own light dimming slightly with every thread she restored. But the balance was stabilizing. She could feel it. The next figure she encountered was different. It wasn't a shadowy silhouette or a flickering ember of a life. This one stood tall and clear, its golden thread glowing brightly. The figure turned to her, its face familiar in a way that sent chills down her spine. "Hello, Eliza," it said, its voice calm and steady. "It's been a long time." It's been a long time." Eliza froze. The figure was herself an exact replica, down to the smallest detail. But its eyes were different. They glowed faintly, like embers in a dying fire, and they held a depth of understanding that made her stomach churn. "What is all this?" Eliza demanded, her voice sharper than she intended. "Another trick? Another test?" The doppelganger smiled faintly, tilting its head. "Not a trick, not a test. I am you, the part of you that remains tethered to what you left behind." The bridge shifted beneath her feet, the golden threads trembling around them, the stars trembling around them. The stars dimmed slightly, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. "You've given so much," the doppelganger continued, its tone soft but insistent. "But what have you kept for yourself? Do you even remember who you were before all this?" Eliza's chest tightened. "I remember enough. I remember why I chose this." "Do you?" the figure asked, stepping closer. "Or have you convinced yourself that this is who you've always been? That the balance is worth more than your own life?" "That the balance is worth more than your own life." "I made my choice," Eliza snapped. "I don't regret it." The figure's expression darkened. "Then why do you hesitate?" The bridge trembled again, the golden threads flickering. Eliza felt the pull of the nexus, urging her forward, but the figure blocked her path. "I'm not hesitating," she said, her voice firm. "I'm moving forward. Are you?" The figure pressed. "Or are you running again? Running from the truth, from the things you can't face?" Eliza's hands clenched into fists, her breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. "I'm not running. Not anymore." The doppelganger stepped closer, its form flickering faintly. "Then prove it." "Face me." The air around them grew heavy, the hum of the threads rising to a deafening pitch. The stars seemed to collapse inward, the void around the bridge folding into itself. Eliza stood her ground, her heart pounding as the doppelganger's form shifted, growing taller and more imposing. It wasn't her anymore. The figure had become something else, an amalgamation of her fears, her doubts, her regrets. Its eyes burned with an intensity that made her skin crawl, and its voice was a cacophony of whispers and screams. "You cannot defeat me," it said, its tone both mocking and menacing. "I am the part of you that will never let go." Eliza took a step back, her hands trembling, but then she stopped, forcing herself to stand tall. "I don't have to defeat you," she said, her voice steady. "I just have to accept you." The creature lunged, its shadowy form consuming the bridge. Eliza closed her eyes, bracing for impact. But instead of fighting back, she opened herself to the darkness, letting it wash over her like a wave. The cold was overwhelming, but she didn't resist. She let it in, let it consume her, and then the light returned. The golden threads flared to life, their glow banishing the shadows. The creature shrieked, its form dissolving into fragments of light that merged with the threads. Eliza fell to her knees, her body trembling as the bridge stabilized beneath her. When she looked up, the doppelganger was gone. The path ahead was clear, the threads glowing brighter than ever. "You have done well," the Nexus said, its voice filled with quiet reverence. "You have faced the darkness within yourself and emerged whole." Eliza stood, her resolve stronger than ever. "I'm ready to keep going." The bridge stretched endlessly before her, but she didn't falter. Each step was a promise, a commitment to the worlds she had sworn to protect. The challenges would never end, but neither would her determination. And as she walked, the golden set threads pulsed in harmony with her heartbeat, their light a testament to the balance she had fought so hard to restore. As Eliza moved forward, the threads seemed to grow brighter, their hum resonating with an almost melodic quality. The bridges beneath her felt sturdier now, as though her victories were strengthening the nexus itself. Yet, the further she walked, the more she sensed a change in the air. It was subtle at first, a faint chill, a soft whisper on the edge of her hearing. "Eliza." She stopped, her body tensing. The voice was familiar, achingly so. It wasn't the cold, commanding tone of the Nexus, nor the mocking voice of the Abyss. It was warm, tender, her mother's voice. "Eliza, my darling, why did you leave me?" Her breath hitched as the bridge ahead shifted, forming a misty expanse. Shapes began to emerge from the fog, her childhood home, the smell of her mother's perfume lingering in the air, and the faint hum of a lullaby drifting on the breeze. She stepped forward cautiously, her heart pounding. The scene was impossibly vivid, every detail exactly as she remembered it. The creak of the floorboards under her feet, the way the sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, the soft hum of the radio in the background, and there, standing in the doorway, was her mother. "Eliza," her mother said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've been gone so long." Tears welled in her eyes and she shook her head. "You're not real," she said, though her voice faltered. "You're just another test." Her mother stepped closer, her face lined with sorrow. "Does that make what I feel any less real? Does it make the pain of losing you any less true?" Eliza turned away, her hands clenched into fists. "This isn't fair. You're just another trick of the Nexus, trying to make me doubt myself." "Is it?" her mother replied. "Or is it you trying to bury your guilt?" "You left, Eliza. You never looked back. And now, you hide behind the balance, pretending it's all for some greater purpose." The words cut deep, and Eliza's resolve wavered. "I had to leave," she whispered. "I couldn't stay. There was so..." She whispered, "Much I needed to do. So much I needed to find." "And did you find it?" her mother asked, her tone soft but piercing. "Or are you still running?" The fog around her thickened, and the scene shifted. She was no longer in her childhood home, but standing on a busy street, the sounds of the city echoing around her. She saw herself years younger chasing after a story, her face alight with determination but shadowed by exhaustion. "You've always been searching," her mother's voice said, now coming from everywhere and nowhere. "But have you ever stopped to ask what you're really looking for?" Eliza sank to her knees, the weight of the question pressing down on her. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I don't know anymore." The fog began to dissipate, and the golden threads reappeared, their light steady and unwavering. The voice softened, almost tender. "The balance isn't just about the worlds you protect. It's about the balance within yourself. You cannot save them if you cannot save yourself." Eliza wiped her eyes, her hands trembling. "How do I do that?" she asked, her voice breaking. "How do I find that balance?" The threads pulsed gently, their light growing warmer. "You already have," the voice said. "Every step you take, every thread you mend, every truth you face it is all part of the balance." The bridge steadied beneath her, and the mist cleared beneath her, and the mist cleared entirely. She rose to her feet, the weight on her chest easing slightly. The path ahead stretched endlessly, but she no longer felt daunted. She felt ready. As she walked on, The stars around her began to shift. They grew closer, brighter, brighter, their light reflecting in the threads. She could feel the energy of the worlds pulsing through her, each one unique and vibrant. She was no longer just a traveler on the bridge, she was a part of it, her essence woven into the very fabric of the nexus. And then she saw it, a figure in the distance, standing at the edge of the bridge. It was tall and cloaked in shadow, but its presence was unmistakable. This wasn't a test or a memory. This was something real. Eliza, the voice of the Nexus said, its tone grave. You have reached the final threshold. The figure turned, and Eliza's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a monster or a reflection of herself. It was someone else, someone entirely new. Far, the figure said, its voice deep and resonant. But the journey does not end here. Who are you? Eliza asked, her voice steady despite the unease curling in her chest. The figure stepped forward, its features obscured by the shadows. I am the keeper of the threads. The guardian before you? And I have been waiting for you. Quickened, waiting for me? Why? To show you what comes next, the figure said, extending a hand. To guide you beyond the nexus, into the heart of the balance. The air grew heavy with anticipation, the golden threads trembling with energy. Eliza stared at the outstretched, trembling with energy. Eliza stared at the outstretched hand, her mind racing. She had come so far, faced so much. But she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward and took the figure's hand. The moment their fingers touched, the stars around her flared to life, and the bridge dissolved into light. Eliza was no longer walking. She was flying, carried by the threads into a place beyond comprehension. The nexus hummed with power, its energy flowing through her as she stepped into the unknown. The balance awaited, and Eliza was ready. The light carried Eliza into a space unlike any she had seen before. It wasn't the labyrinthine nexus, the starry bridge, or the shifting chambers. This was something entirely new, a realm where time and space seemed to lose meaning. Golden threads wove themselves into intricate patterns all around her, forming shimmering constellations, swirling galaxies, and pulsating orbs that seemed alive with energy. The air here was dense, with power, and the hum of the threads was no longer faint. It was a symphony, rising and falling like the rhythm of a heartbeat. Eliza floated in this luminous void, her body weightless and her senses overwhelmed. For a moment she felt as though she were part of the threads themselves, her essence blending seamlessly with their light. And then she heard a voice, deeper and more resonant than the nexus itself. Eliza Harrington, it said, each syllable vibrating through her heart, very being. You have come to the threshold of creation. She turned, her gaze searching for the source of the voice. It wasn't like the voices she had encountered before. This one wasn't testing her, challenging her, or even guiding her. It was absolute, a presence that seemed to encompass everything. Who are you? She asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to remain calm. I am the architect, the voice replied, the first and the last, the weaver of the threads, the keeper of the balance before guardians were born. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. You were the one who created the nexus? The architect's form began to take shape before her, emerging from the threads like a sculpture being carved from light. It was massive and ethereal, its features impossible to define. It was both human and otherworldly, its form shifting like liquid gold. The nexus was my design, the architect said, but it is not mine alone. It belongs to all who walk its paths, who weave its threads, who defend its balance. It belongs to you now. Eliza's mind raced. the weight of her journey crashing down on her. Why show yourself now? Why not before? Because you were not ready, the architect said simply. The path of the guardian is one of discovery, of growth. You have faced your fears, your doubts, your darkness. You have proven yourself. But there is one truth you have yet to learn. The golden threads around her began to shift, forming a swirling vortex that stretched endlessly into the void. Images appeared within the vortex scenes of worlds she had seen in the threads, moments of light and shadow, creation and destruction. What truth? Eliza asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The balance, the architect said, is not eternal. The words struck her like a blow. What do you mean? I thought the balance was the foundation of everything. It is, the architect replied, but like all things, it is fragile. The abyss is not your enemy. It is the balance's counterpart. Light and darkness exist in harmony, but harmony is fleeting. The balance must be maintained, rebuilt, reforged again and again. Eliza's heart sank. So, it never ends. The fight, the struggle, it's endless. The architect nodded. Yes, but it is not without purpose. Every thread you mend, every world you protect, every soul you guide, it all matters. The balance is not about perfection. It is about persistence. The vortex grew brighter. It grew brighter. It grew brighter, energy pulling at her like a tide. The architect stepped closer, its golden form towering over her. Your journey does not end here, Eliza, it said. You are not merely the guardian of the Nexus. You are its heart, its soul, its light. The threads around her began to glow more intensely, their hum rising into a crescendo. Eliza felt the energy coursing through her, filling every fiber of her being. She wasn't just connected to the threads, she was the threads, the bridge, the threads, balance itself. What happens now? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging within her. Now, the architect said, you walk the infinite path. The light enveloped her completely, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. And then, she was nothing but silence. And then, she was standing on the bridge once more, the stars around her brighter than ever. The threads pulsed with energy, their glow steady and unyielding. Eliza took a deep breath, her resolve stronger than ever. She didn't need the architect to tell her what came next. She already knew. She walked forward, her steps confident, her purpose clear. The balance would always be fragile, the fight unending, but she wasn't afraid. She was the guardian, the keeper of the Nexus, the light in the keeper of the Nexus, the light in darkness. And she would walk this path for as long as it took. As Eliza pressed forward on the glowing bridge, she could feel the threads vibrating beneath her feet, their energy harmonizing with her heartbeat. Each step was deliberate, each breath steady, but the weight of her journey lingered in her chest. The architect's revelation of the endless cycle of balance was both humbling and daunting. The stars around her shifted again, forming a swirling constellation that seemed to dance in time with the threads. But as the light of the stars grew brighter, so did the shadows they cast. Eliza felt a chill run down her spine as the air thickened with an oppressive energy. The voice of the Nexus returned, faint but urgent. The abyss stirs again. Ahead, the bridge began to warp, the golden threads flickering as tendrils of darkness emerged from the void. The abyss was different this time, less a singular entity and more a force, its presence seeping into every entity and more a force, its presence seeping into every corner of the space. The shadows twisted and writhed, forming grotesque shapes that lunged toward Eliza. She didn't hesitate. gripping the threads with her mind. She summoned their light, creating a barrier that repelled the dark tendrils, but the abyss wasn't retreating, it was adapting, its forms shifting and multiplying with each attack. "You cannot hold me back forever," the abyss whispered, its voice a cacophony of despair. "The balance is fragile. You cannot protect it alone." Eliza gritted her teeth, the light of the threads dimming as her strength waned. "I'm not alone," she said, her voice resolute. "The Nexus is with me. The light is with me." But the abyss only laughed, its form expanding to engulf the bridge. "You think the light is enough? You think your resolve can withstand the darkness? You are a flicker, guardian, a momentary spark, and I am eternal." The tendrils closed in, their shadows smothering the golden glow. Eliza's vision blurred as the oppressive energy pressed against her, her connection to the threads faltering, and then she heard them voices, faint but growing stronger. "Eliza!" The voices echoed around her, familiar and reassuring. She turned to see figures emerging from the shadows, souls she had saved, threads she had mended. Each one carried a faint glow, their light adding to the golden threads around them. "You're not alone," one of them said, a young woman with kind eyes. "You never have been." The figures joined her, their light pushing back against the darkness. The abyss roared, its tendrils retreating as the combined energy of the souls overwhelmed it. Eliza felt their strength flowing into her, bolstering her resolve. "You can't defeat me," the abyss bellowed, its form thrashing violently. "You cannot stop the cycle." Eliza stepped forward, her hands glowing with the light of the Nexus. "I don't have to stop it," she said, her voice steady and commanding. "I just have to keep going." With a surge of energy, the souls around her channeled their light into the threads, creating a wave of golden brilliance that swept across the bridge. The abyss shrieked as the light consumed it, its form dissolving into the void. The bridge steadied, the stars around them shining brighter than ever. Eliza turned to the souls, her heart full of gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft, one by one. The souls nodded before fading back into the threads, their light becoming part of the balance once more. Eliza stood alone again, but she no longer felt alone. The Nexus spoke, its voice calm and reassuring. "You have done well, Eliza. The balance is stronger because of you." She nodded, her resolve unshaken. "But it's not over, is it?" "No," the Nexus replied. "The balance is a journey, not a destination, but you have proven yourself worthy of the path." The stars shifted again, forming a new constellation that pointed the way forward. Eliza took a deep breath, the weight of her role settling comfortably on her shoulders. She stepped forward, the golden threads glowing steadily beneath her feet. The journey continued, and so did she, guardian of the Nexus, protector of the balance and light in the darkness. Eliza continued walking, her steps steady but her mind alive with questions. The stars and threads around her pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, a symphony of light and energy that was both calming and overwhelming. Each step felt like progress, but the road ahead remained infinite, an endless stretch of light and shadow. As she moved deeper into the Nexus, she felt the air shift again. It wasn't the oppressive weight of the abyss or the calming energy of the threads, it was something new. The space around her began to shimmer, the golden threads vibrating with an unfamiliar frequency. "Eliza," the Nexus spoke, its tone tinged with unease. "The threads are shifting." She stopped, her gaze darting to the threads above. They were wayward, flickering, their light dimming and brightening erratically. The harmony she had felt moments ago was gone, replaced by a chaotic rhythm that set her nerves on edge. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice tight. "An anomaly," the Nexus replied. Something is disrupting the balance from within. Before she could respond, the bridge beneath her feet trembled, cracks appearing in its surface. The golden threads above her began to twist and coil, forming a spiraling vortex of light and shadow. Eliza steadied herself, her heart pounding as the vortex expanded, pulling the stars and threads into its swirling core. Eliza, anomaly threatens to sever the threads. But how do I stop it? She demanded, her voice rising with panic. You must enter it, the Nexus said, its voice unwavering. You must confront the source. Eliza stared at the vortex, its pull growing stronger with each passing second. Fear clawed at her chest, but she forced herself to step forward. She had faced the abyss, embraced the balance, and mended countless threads. She could face this too. Taking a deep breath, she leapt into the vortex. The sensation was overwhelming. She was weightless, her body spinning as she was pulled deeper into the swirling mass of light and shadow. The hum of the threads was deafening, a cacophony of sound that seemed to pierce her very soul. When she finally stopped spinning, she found herself standing in a strange new space. It was unlike anything she had seen in the Nexus, a vast, desolate landscape of jagged rocks and shifting sands, bathed in a dim, eerie light. The golden threads were here too, but they were frayed and broken, their energy leaking into the air like wisps of smoke. Eliza, the voice was faint, barely audible over the sound of the wind. She turned, her eyes narrowing as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man, his form flickering like a dying flame. He was tethered to a single golden thread, but the thread was unraveling, its light fading with each passing moment. Who are you? She asked, her voice steady but cautious. The man looked up, his eyes filled with sorrow. I was a guardian, he said, his voice heavy with regret. Long before you. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. A guardian. But how? Why are you here? The man smiled faintly, a bitter expression that didn't reach his eyes. Because I failed, he said simply. I let the balance slip. I let the threads break. She shook her head, disbelief flooding her. That's not possible. The Nexus wouldn't. The Nexus doesn't choose perfection, he interrupted. It chooses those who are willing to try. But sometimes trying isn't enough. His words hung heavy in the air, and Eliza felt a pang of doubt creep into her heart. If you are failed, then why are you here? Why didn't the Nexus replace you? Because the Nexus is merciful, the man said. It doesn't abandon its guardians. It gives them a chance to redeem themselves. The ground beneath them trembled, and the frayed thread tethered to the man began to glow faintly. He looked at it, his expression softening. I've been waiting, Eliza, waiting for someone like you, like me. Like, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Someone who hasn't given up, he said, someone who still believes in the balance. He held out his hand, the faint glow of his thread reflecting in his eyes. Will you help me, Eliza? Will you help me restore what I've lost? Eliza hesitated, her mind racing. She could feel the weight of his failure, the pain of his regret, but she also saw the spark of hope in his eyes. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, he was asking for a chance. Taking a deep breath, she reached out and took his hand. The moment their hands touched, the golden thread tethered to the man flared to life, its light growing brighter and steadier. The frayed edges began to mend, weaving themselves back into the fabric of the Nexus. The desolate landscape around them shifted, the jagged rocks smoothing into golden plains, the dim light brightening into a soft glow. The man's form solidified, his eyes widening as the thread pulsed with renewed energy. Thank you, he said. He said, voice filled with awe. I didn't think it was possible. It's always possible, Eliza said, her voice firm. The balance isn't about perfection. It's about persistence. The Nexus spoke, its tone reverent. You have done more than restore the thread, Eliza. You have restored hope. Eliza smiled faintly, her grip on the man's hand steady. Then let's keep going. As the landscape around them dissolved into light, the bridge reappeared, stretching endlessly into the star-filled void. Eliza and the man stood together, their steps in harmony as they continued the journey. The balance awaited, and they would face it together, as Eliza and the redeemed guardian walked side by side along the luminous bridge. The golden threads pulsed with a harmonious rhythm. The man whose name she learned was Cale was quiet at first, his eyes scanning the endless threads above and below them. His presence felt steady, yet weighed down by centuries of regret. What happened to you, Cale? Eliza finally asked, her voice breaking the silence. What caused the balance to slip when you were the guardian? Cale's expression darkened, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Pride, he said simply. I thought I could control the threads, bend them to my will. I wanted to strengthen the Nexus by force, but I didn't understand the cost. Eliza frowned, her steps slowing. The cost? The threads are not ours to control, Cale explained. They are alive, connected to every soul, every world. When I forced the balance, I severed connections I didn't understand. I thought I was helping, but I was unraveling everything. His words hung heavy in the air, and Eliza felt a chill run down her spine. And the Nexus let you stay? Cale nodded. It didn't abandon me, but it couldn't trust me anymore. It left me a void, tethered to a single thread, to reflect on my failure. I was meant to fade away, but then you came, your light. It reminded me of what I had forgotten. Eliza's heart ached at the pain in his voice, but she couldn't dwell on it. She had her own role to play, her own path to walk. Then let's make sure we don't repeat those mistakes, she said firmly. The balance isn't about control, it's about trust. Cale smiled faintly, his steps growing steadier. You're wiser than I was. The balance is in good hands. The air around them shifted, the stars brightening as the threads began to hum more intensely. Eliza felt a surge of energy, a pull toward something ahead. It wasn't the oppressive weight of the abyss or the comforting presence of the Nexus. It was something new, something she couldn't yet name. Cale seemed to sense it too. Do you feel that? He asked, his voice tinged with unease. Eliza nodded. It's like the threads are calling to us. As they moved closer, the light of the threads grew blinding, forcing them to shield their eyes. When the brilliance finally faded, they found themselves standing before a massive gateway, made entirely of golden light. The threads converged here, weaving in and out of the structure like rivers of energy. What is this? Eliza asked, her voice hushed with awe. The threshold, Cale said, his expression solemn. It's the Nexus heart. Few guardians have ever seen it. The gateway pulsed, its light shifting as if responding to their presence. Eliza felt a deep resonance within her chest, the hum of the threads aligning with her heartbeat. She stepped forward, her hand reaching out instinctively toward the glowing surface. Eliza, Cale said, his voice cautious. The threshold is not just a place, it's a test. To enter it is to confront the essence of the balance itself. She hesitated, her hand hovering inches from the light. What happens if I fail? Cale's expression was unreadable. I don't know. No guardian who failed has ever returned. Eliza took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. Then I'll just have to succeed. The moment her hand touched the gateway, the light engulfed her. She was pulled forward, her body weightless as she was carried into the heart of the threshold. The air was thick with energy, the hum of the threads growing louder and louder until it was all she could hear. When the light faded, she found herself in a vast, empty expanse. The ground beneath her feet was made of shimmering gold, and the sky above was an endless void of stars. In the center of the space stood a figure cloaked in shadow, its presence radiating power. Eliza's radiating power. Harrington, the figure said, its voice deep and resonant. You have come to the heart of the Nexus, but are you prepared to face its truth? She stood tall, her eyes locked on the figure. I faced the abyss, mended the threads, and embraced the balance. I'm ready for whatever comes next. The figure tilted its head, its form flickering like a flame. Then show me. Prove your worth, Guardian. The ground trembled, and the stars above began to swirl, forming a vortex of light and shadow. The figure raised its hand, and the vortex descended, enveloping Eliza in a whirlwind of energy. She felt her memories being She felt her memories being pulled to the surface, moments of joy and pain, triumph and failure. The vortex shifted, forming images around her. She saw her childhood home, her mother's face etched with sorrow. She saw the friends she had left behind, the connections she had left behind, had severed in her quest for truth. She saw herself lost, searching, never satisfied. Do you see now? The figure said, its voice echoing in her mind. The balance is not just about the Nexus. It is about you. The threads of your own life are frayed, and until you mend them, the balance will remain incomplete. Eliza's chest tightened, the weight of the truth pressing down on her. She had always thought of herself as a seeker, a protector, someone who put others before herself. But now she saw the cracks, the doubts she had ignored, the pain she had buried. How do I fix it? She asked, her voice trembling. How do I mend my own threads? The figure stepped closer, its form becoming more defined. It was her another reflection, but this one was whole, radiant with light. You already know the answer, it said. You just have to let go. Let go of what? Eliza asked, her voice breaking. Everything that holds you back. The reflection said, the fear, the guilt, the regret. Let them go, and you will find the balance within yourself. Eliza closed her eyes, the vortex swirling around her. She felt the weight of her failures, her doubts, her fears, but she also felt the light of the threads. Steady and unwavering. Taking a deep breath, she opened her heart, releasing the darkness she had carried for so long. The vortex slowed, its energy softening into a gentle glow. When she opened her eyes, the figure was gone, and the threshold was calm. The threads around her pulsed with a steady rhythm, their light brighter than ever. You have done well, Eliza. The voice of done well, Eliza. The voice of done well, Eliza. The voice of the Nexus said, its tone filled with quiet pride. You have restored the balance within and without. Eliza smiled faintly, her steps steady as she walked forward. The journey continued, but for the first time she felt truly whole. Golden light around Eliza softened, and she stepped forward, each footfall echoing in the endless void of the threshold. The air here was no longer heavy with tension, but instead thrummed with quiet strength. The threads around her seemed to sing, a melody that resonated with the harmony she now carried within herself. As she moved, the space began to change again. The shimmering floor beneath her morphed into a vast expanse of golden plains, stretching endlessly in all directions. The sky above shimmered with countless stars, each one connected by faint threads of light that formed a lattice of constellations. In the distance, a structure loomed, a towering spire, that seemed to touch the very edge of the cosmos. Its surface was smooth and reflective, and it pulsed faintly with the same golden light as the threads. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She didn't need the nexus to tell her what this was. The apex, she whispered. The voice of the nexus returned, gentle but firm. You have reached the heart of the nexus, Eliza. The apex is where all threads converge, where the balance is most fragile and most powerful. What am I supposed to do here? She asked, her voice filled with awe and trepidation. The apex will reveal what is needed, the nexus replied. But tread carefully. This is where the threads are woven and unwoven. One misstep could unravel everything. Eliza squared her shoulders, her resolve hardening. She had come too far to falter now. The path to the apex stretched before her, a bridge of light that seemed to float above the golden plains. Each step was deliberate, the weight of her responsibility growing heavier with every stride. As she approached the spire, the air grew warmer, the hum of the threads intensifying until it was a constant vibration that seemed to seep into her very bones. The apex towered over her, its surface shifting and shimmering like liquid gold. It was beautiful and imposing, a testament to the nexus' power and fragility. Eliza reached out to touch the surface, and the moment her fingers made contact, the world around her shifted. The plains and stars disappeared, replaced by an infinite expanse of golden threads, each one weaving in and out of the void. She was no longer standing, she was floating, her body weightless as the threads surrounded her. This is the loom, the nexus said. It's the loom, the nexus said. It's a loom, the nexus said, voice reverberating through the space. The source of all creation, the fabric of existence. Eliza's heart pounded as she gazed at the intricate web of threads. Each one pulsed with energy, their light varying in intensity. She could feel the life in them, the countless worlds and souls they connected, and in the center of it all was a single thread, brighter than the rest, its glow steady and unwavering. That is the core thread, the nexus said. It is the anchor of the balance, the thread from which all others flow. Eliza reached out toward the core thread, her hand trembling as her fingers brushed its surface. A surge of energy coursed through her, filling her with a sense of unity and purpose. She could see everything, the worlds, the lives, the stories connected to the thread. It was overwhelming and beautiful, a kaleidoscope of light and emotion. But then, she saw it, a dark tendril coiling around the core thread, its shadow spreading like a stain. The tendril pulsed with a familiar energy, one she recognized instantly. The abyss, she said, her voice a mixture of anger and fear. Yes, the nexus confirmed. The abyss seeks to corrupt the core thread, to unravel the balance. From within, Eliza's jaw tightened. Then I'll stop it. As she reached for the dark tendril, it recoiled, hissing like a living creature. The shadows around her thickened, forming a barrier that pulsed with malevolent energy. The light pulsed with malevolent energy. The light of the threads dimmed, and the hum of the loom grew dissonant, like an instrument out of tune. Eliza! The voice of the abyss was a low growl, echoing through the loom. You cannot fight me here. This is my domain as much as yours. This isn't your domain, she shot back. This is the balance, and you're nothing but a parasite. The abyss laughed, its tendrils tightening around the core thread. And yet, you cannot exist without me. The light needs the dark, guardian. You cannot exist without me. The light needs the dark, guardian. You cannot destroy me without destroying yourself. Eliza hesitated, the truth of the words cutting deep. The balance wasn't about eliminating the darkness, it was about coexistence. But this was different. The abyss wasn't maintaining balance, it was trying to tip the scales. She closed her eyes, reaching deep into herself for the strength she had found time and again. The light of the thread still pulsed within her, steady and unyielding. She focused on that light, channeling it toward the core thread. The golden glow intensified, pushing back against the darkness. The tendrils hissed and writhed, their grip weakening as the light grew brighter. "You cannot win," the abyss roared, its voice filled with desperation. "The balance cannot survive without me." Eliza opened her eyes, her gaze fierce. "The balance doesn't need you to destroy it." With a surge of energy, she directed the light into the core thread, severing the tendrils one by one. The shadows dissolved, their dissonant hum fading into silence. The core thread pulsed with renewed strength, its light brighter than ever. The loom steadied, the threads humming in perfect harmony once more. Eliza floated there, her chest heaving as the energy settled. The voice of the Nexus returned, its tone filled with reverence. "You have done it, Eliza. The balance is restored." She smiled faintly, her exhaustion giving way to a sense of peace. "For now," she said softly. "But the journey isn't over, is it?" Softly. "But the journey isn't over, is it?" "No," the Nexus replied. "The balance is a living thing. It must be nurtured, protected, and understood. But you have proven that you are more than capable." Eliza nodded, her resolve unshaken. She wasn't just a guardian, she was the heart of heart, the Nexus, the keeper of the balance, and she would walk this path for as long as it took. Eliza floated within the loom, her senses still humming with the energy of the core thread. The golden threads around her thrummed in harmony. Light, steady, and unyielding. For a moment, the universe felt whole, as if the Nexus itself was breathing a sigh of relief. But the peace didn't last. The hum of the threads shifted, a discordant note breaking through the harmony. The light dimmed, and Eliza felt the weight of the loom pressing against her, as though the balance itself was trembling. "Nexus," she called out, her voice echoing in the void. "What's happening?" The voice of the Nexus was quiet, almost hesitant. "The balance has been restored, but the cost was great. The abyss has retreated, but its influence lingers. The core thread is whole, but the surrounding fragile." Eliza looked a surrounding fragile. Around, her gaze sweeping the endless expanse of the loom. She could see it now, faint cracks forming along some of the threads, their light flickering like dying embers. The core thread was strong, but the web it supported was fragile. "It's pretty fragile." Its connection strained. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the growing unease in her chest. "You must weave," the Nexus replied. "The loom is alive, but it requires a guardian to mend its fractures. This task is yours now, Eliza." She nodded, her resolve hardening. "Show me how." The threads around her began to shift, forming a swirling pattern that surrounded her like a cocoon. The light grew brighter, and she felt the energy of the loom flowing through her, guiding her hands. She reached out, instinctively, her fingers brushing against a frayed thread. The moment she touched it, images flooded her mind, memories, and moments from a world connected to the thread. She saw its people, their lives entwined with the golden light. Their joys, their struggles, and the shadow of the abyss lingering at the edges of their existence. Eliza focused, channeling the light of the Nexus into the thread. The cracks began to mend. the light growing steadier as the thread pulsed with renewed strength. One by one, she moved through the loom, weaving the frayed threads back into the fabric of the nexus. Each repair took a piece of her energy, but with every mended thread, she felt the balance growing stronger. Hours passed, or perhaps days. Time had no meaning in the loom, and Eliza had lost track of it entirely. Her body ached, her mind heavy with the weight of countless worlds. But she pressed on, her determination unwavering as she worked. She began to wavering, noticed something of faint presence lingering at the edge of the loom. It was subtle at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. But as she continued to weave, the presence grew stronger, its energy dark and familiar. Eliza, the voice of the Theolov Nexus warned, its tone sharp. The abyss is stirring again. Her hands froze, her breath catching in her throat. I thought we stopped it. You weakened it, the Nexus replied. But the abyss is not an enemy to be defeated. It is a force, is not an enemy to be defeated. It is a force. That must be understood. Before Eliza could respond, the shadows around her began to shift. The threads dimmed, their light flickering as the presence of the abyss grew stronger. The air grew heavy, and she felt the familiar weight of despair pressing down on her. Eliza, the voice of the abyss was a low growl, echoing through the loom. You think you've won, but you've only delayed the inevitable. I've restored the balance, she said firmly, her voice steady. You have no place here. The abyss laughed, its form materializing in the void. It was larger now, its shape shifting and undefined, a mass of shadows that pulsed with malevolent energy. The balance is fragile, Guardian. You cannot protect it forever. Eliza took a deep breath, her gaze unwavering. I don't need to protect it forever. I just need to protect it now. The abyss lunged, its shadows surging toward her like a tidal wave. She didn't flinch, her hands glowing with the light of the Nexus as she reached out to the threads around her. The loom responded, its energy flowing into her like a river of golden light. The shadows clashed with the light, the two forces colliding in a storm of energy. Eliza gritted her teeth, the strain of holding back the abyss threatening to overwhelm her. But she didn't falter. She drew on the strength of the threads, the countless lives they represented, and pushed back. You cannot destroy me, the abyss roared, its voice filled with desperation. The darkness is eternal. Eliza's eyes blazed with determination. And so is the light. With one final surge of energy, she channeled the full power of the loom into the shadows. The abyss let out a deafening roar as the light consumed it, its form dissolving into the void. The threads around her steadied, their light shining brighter than ever. The Nexus spoke, its voice calm and reverent. You have done the impossible, Eliza. You have brought harmony to the loom. She fell to her knees, her chest to her knees, her chest heaving as the energy settled. The air around her was still, the hum of the threads a soft, soothing melody. I did what I had to, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But the journey isn't over, is it? No, the Nexus replied. The balance is a living thing. It will always require a guardian. Eliza smiled faintly, her resolve unshaken. She rose to her feet, the light of the threads reflecting in her eyes. The journey continued, and she was ready. Eliza steadied herself, the hum of the loom resonating through her very core. Each thread she had mended, each shadow she had faced, seemed to leave an imprint on her soul. The light of the loom had grown stronger, brighter, but she knew that the abyss would always linger. The balance wasn't a victory to be won. It was a state to be maintained, an eternal struggle that required vigilance. The golden threads around her began to shift again, their movements deliberate and precise. The loom responded to her presence, weaving itself into new patterns that pulsed with life. But as the threads settled, she noticed something strange. One thread, faint and fragile, glowed with a peculiar hue, a deep crimson that stood out against the golden light. "What is that?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity and unease. The Nexus hesitated before responding. "It is a thread that should not exist." Eliza moved closer, her eyes narrowing as she examined the crimson thread. It pulsed faintly, its energy, discordant and unstable. Unlike the other threads, it didn't weave into the fabric of the loom. Instead, it hung loosely, disconnected from the balance. "How is that possible?" she asked. "Every thread is part of the Nexus, part of the balance, not this one," the Nexus said, its tone grim. "It is an anomaly, a thread from outside the balance, from a realm beyond a loom." Eliza's chest tightened. "Another realm?" Eliza's chest tightened. "Another realm? What does that mean?" "It means," the Nexus said, "that the balance is not as contained as we believed." The implications hit her like a blow. The loom wasn't the end. It was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The crimson thread wasn't an anomaly. It was a clue, a doorway to something far greater than the Nexus. "What do I do with it?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease curling in her chest. "You must follow it," the Nexus replied. "Discover its origin, its purpose. But be warned, Eliza. This thread leads to a place where the balance holds no sway." The air grew colder as the Nexus's words sank in. Eliza reached out, her fingers brushing against the crimson thread. The moment she touched it, the loom around her dissolved, and she was pulled into a void of swirling light and shadow. She landed hard on a surface that felt both solid and fluid, her senses overwhelmed by the alien landscape around her. The sky above was a churning mass of dark clouds streaked with crimson lightning. The ground beneath her feet was black and glassy, reflecting the chaotic sky like a twisted mirror. The air was thick with energy, crackling with a power that felt raw and uncontained. This place wasn't part of the Nexus, it was something else entirely, a realm that defied the laws of balance. "Eliza, the voice of the Nexus was faint, distant. "I cannot follow you here. You are beyond my reach." She clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. "Then I'll face this alone." The crimson thread pulsed faintly, stretching into the distance like a beacon. Eliza followed it, her steps cautious but deliberate. The air grew heavier with each step, the energy of the realm pressing against her like a physical force. As she moved, she began to see shapes emerging from the shadows. They were vague at first, little more than flickering silhouettes, but as she drew closer, they solidified into figures, twisted, grotesque beings that seemed to be made of the same crimson energy as the thread. One of the creatures turned its glowing eyes toward her, its form rippling like liquid fire. It let out a low growl, its body shifting and expanding as it moved toward her. Eliza didn't flinch. She reached out to the golden threads within herself, summoning their light. The creature recoiled, hissing as the golden glow cut through the crimson energy. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice steady. "And neither do I." The creature lunged, its claws slicing through the air. Eliza dodged, her movements precise and fluid. She swung her arm, the golden light forming a barrier that repelled the attack. The creature howled, its form dissolving into a cloud of crimson mist. But more creatures were emerging, their forms growing larger and more defined. Tightened her grip on the light, her gaze unwavering. The battle was relentless. Each creature she faced seemed more powerful than the last. their crimson energy overwhelming and chaotic. But Eliza didn't falter. She moved with purpose, golden light cutting through the shadows like a blade. As the last creature fell, the crimson thread pulsed brighter, its energy intensifying. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the air crackled with electricity. She could feel the thread pulling her forward, drawing her closer to its source. She followed it without hesitation, her steps quickening as the landscape shifted around her. The sky grew darker, the crimson lightning more intense. The ground beneath her feet cracked and splintered, each step threatening to send her plummeting into the void. And then she saw it. At the end of the thread stood a massive structure, its surface glowing with the same crimson light. It pulsed with energy, its form shifting and twisting like a living thing. Eliza felt her breath catch in her throat as she approached it, the weight of its presence pressing down on her. "This is it," she said softly. "The source." The thread connected to the structure. Its source. The thread connected to the structure, its energy flowing into it like a river. Eliza reached out, her fingers brushing against the surface. The moment she made contact, the world around her erupted in light and sound. She was no longer standing on solid ground. She was floating, suspended in a void of crimson and gold. The energy of the structure surged through her, filling her with a power that was both exhilarating and terrifying. "Eliza." The voice of the Nexus was faint, distant. "Be careful." She closed her eyes, her resolve unshaken. "I will." And with that, she stepped into the unknown as Eliza stepped into the crimson void. The energy surrounding her shifted again. The golden light she carried within her clashed with the crimson energy, creating a storm of power that swirled violently around her. The structure ahead of her pulsated like a beating heart, each thrum reverberating through her body. She floated in the void, weightless yet tethered to the crimson thread that had brought her prone. Here, the thread vibrated with an intensity that threatened to overwhelm her senses. But Eliza steadied herself, focusing on the light within her. The Nexus might not be able to guide her in this realm, but its lessons and strength were still forever with her. As she moved closer to the structure, a voice rang out, a voice unlike any she had heard before. It was deep, resonant, and layered, as if multiple beings were speaking at once. "You have come far, Eliza Harrington." The voice said, its tone neither welcoming nor hostile. "But you do not belong here." Eliza narrowed her eyes, her golden light flaring in response to the voice. "I came because the balance led me here. Who are you?" The structure shifted, its surface rippling like liquid. From its center emerged a figure, humanoid but towering, its form composed entirely of swirling crimson energy. Its eyes glowed like embers, and its presence was both commanding and overwhelming. "I am the Warden," the figure said, its voice echoing in the void. "I am the guardian of this realm, just as you are the guardian of the Nexus." Eliza frowned, her hands glowing with golden light. "If you're a guardian, then why is this thread disrupting the balance? Why is it fraying the loom?" The Warden tilted its head, its form flickering. "Because our realms were never meant to intersect. The crimson thread is a crack in the fabric of existence, a wound caused by the clash of our energies. Your light and my shadow together, they go cortis id airs when tall create instability." Eliza's mind raced, trying to process the Warden's words. If that's true, then how do we fix it? How do we close the crack? The Warden's gaze darkened. By severing the connection, by destroying the thread. Her breath caught in her throat. Destroy it. But what happens to the worlds connected to it? What happens to the worlds connected to it? What happens to the lives it supports? They will cease to exist. the warden said simply. It is the only way to restore stability. Eliza shook her head, her golden light flaring brighter. There has to be another way. Destroying the thread can't be the answer. The warden stepped. Can't be the answer. Closer, its presence growing more oppressive. There is no other way. The balance of your realm and the harmony of mine cannot coexist. One must give way. The void around them began to tremble, the clash of energies intensifying. The golden threads from the nexus wove faintly into the void, their light struggling to hold steady against the crimson storm. Eliza felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her, the enormity of what was at stake. She closed her eyes, centering. She closed her eyes, centering herself. What if we don't destroy it? What if we mend it instead? The warden's form flickered, its gaze piercing. Mend it. You would attempt to weave two opposing forces into harmony. Such a thing has never been done. That doesn't mean it can't be, Eliza said firmly. The balance isn't about choosing one side over the other. It's about finding a way to coexist. The warden was silent for a long moment, the storm around for a long moment, the storm around, then growing still. Finally, it spoke, its voice tinged with curiosity. Then show me, Guardian. Show me how you will achieve this impossible balance. Eliza stepped forward, her hands glowing with golden light. The crimson thread trembled beneath her touch, its energy erratic and unstable. She could feel the chaos within it, the raw, unbridled power that threatened to unravel everything. But she could also feel its potential, its strength, its connection to something greater. She reached deep within herself, drawing on the energy of the loom, the lessons of the nexus, and the resolve that had carried her this far. Slowly, she began to weave the golden light into the crimson thread, binding the two energies together. The process was agonizing. The clash of energies surged through her, threatening to tear her apart, but she held on, her focus unwavering. The warden watched in silence, its form flickering as the thread began to stabilize. The golden and crimson lights intertwined, their energies merging into a new, vibrant hue. The thread pulsed steadily, its light no longer erratic but harmonious. The storm around them calmed, the void growing still. Eliza stepped back, her chest back, heaving as she gazed at the newly woven thread. It glowed with a brilliance she had never seen before, its light a perfect blend of gold and crimson. The warden stepped forward, its gaze fixed on the thread. You have done what I believe to be impossible, it said, its voice filled with awe. You have created harmony between our realms. Eliza smiled faintly, her exhaustion evident but her resolve unbroken. The balance isn't about destruction, it's about understanding. The warden inclined its head, its form shimmering. You have my respect, Guardian, and my gratitude. The harmony you have created will ripple through both our realms. The void around them began to shift, the golden and crimson lights weaving together to form a bridge that connected the two realms. The warden stepped aside, allowing Eliza to move forward. As she crossed the bridge, the nexus voice returned, filled with quiet pride. You have done more than restore the balance, Eliza. Have expanded it. You have shown that even opposing forces can coexist. Eliza nodded, her steps steady. The journey continued, but she was no longer just a guardian of the nexus. She was a bridge, a weaver of worlds, and a beacon of harmony in the endless expanse of existence, and she would walk this path for as long as it took. As Eliza crossed the glowing bridge formed by the union of the golden and crimson energies, she felt a profound sense of unity. Each step resonated with was and each story reading each step resonated with the harmony she had woven, a testament to the possibility of balance between opposing forces. The swirling void around her began to stabilize, its chaos softening into a gentle hum of light and energy. The bridge stretched endlessly into the Rennesdet. A polluted fold. A factory with fast Sarah Bukapisandri, hard trace of distance, its surface shimmering with the combined brilliance of the Nexus and the Crimson Realm. But as Eliza pressed onward, a faint unease crept into her thoughts. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, and she knew better than to assume her work was done. The voice of the Nexus returned, its tone cautious yet encouraging. The threads are stabilizing, but the path ahead is still uncertain. The balance you've created is fragile. Eliza, it will require it is fragile. Vigilance. I'm ready, she replied, her resolve unwavering. I'll protect it. The air around her grew heavier, the hum of the bridge intensifying as she neared the horizon. Shapes began to emerge from the void, faint at first, but growing clearer with each step. They were structures, towers, arches, and spires that seemed to be made of the same golden crimson energy as the bridge. The architecture was unlike anything Eliza had seen before, a fusion of the elegant patterns of the Nexus and the raw, chaotic forms of the Crimson Realm. At the center of this otherworldly city stood a massive obelisk, its surface pulsing with light. The obelisk seemed to anchor the entire space, its energy radiating outward and connecting to the surrounding structures. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. "This is the Nexus Convergence," the voice of the Nexus explained. "A point where the threads of multiple realms intersect. It is both a sanctuary and a battleground." As Eliza approached the obelisk, she noticed figures moving among the structures. They were humanoid, but their forms shimmered with energy, their features indistinct. Owners radiated crimson. They moved with purpose, tending to the threads that wove through the city. One of the figures turned toward her, its eyes glowing faintly. It stepped forward, its form stabilizing into something more human-like. Its voice was calm and melodic as it spoke. "Guardian of the Loom, you honor as it spoke. Guardian of the Loom, you honor us with your presence." Eliza hesitated, surprised by the greeting. "Who are you?" "We are the Keepers," the figure said, "caretakers of the Convergence, stewards of the balance between realms." The Keeper gestured toward the obelisk. "You have done what few thought possible. You have united the energies of light and shadow, and in doing so, you have restored a fragment of the greater balance." Eliza glanced at the obelisk, its pulsing light almost hypnotic. "If this is a sanctuary, why does it feel so tense?" The Keeper's expression darkened. "Because the balance is never absolute. Forces beyond even the Loom and the Crimson Realm threaten the Convergence. There are entities that seek to unravel what you have created." Before Eliza could respond, a low rumble echoed through the city. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and the light of the obelisk flickered. The Keepers around her stopped their work, their gazes snapping toward the horizon. "They are here," the Keeper said, its voice filled with quiet dread. Eliza turned, her golden light flaring instinctively. In the distance, a dark rift had opened in the void, its edges crackling with jagged energy. From the rift emerged shadowy forms, their movements fluid and unnatural. These were not the chaotic creatures of the Crimson Realm, nor the shadows of the abyss. They were something else entirely, something ancient and malevolent. The keepers moved to form a defensive line, their energy flaring as they prepared to confront the invaders. Eliza stepped forward, her hands glowing with golden light. "What are they?" "They are the Voidborn," the keeper said, its tone grave. "Entities from the spaces between realms. They exist to consume and unmake." The Voidborn surged forward, their forms twisting and writhing as they advanced. The keepers unleashed blasts of energy, their combined light pushing back against the shadows. But the Voidborn were relentless, their dark tendrils slipping through the cracks in the defenses. Eliza joined the fray, her golden light cutting through the shadows like a blade. Each strike was precise, her movements fluid and deliberate. But for every Voidborn she destroyed, more emerged from the rift, their numbers seemingly endless. The obelisk pulsed erratically, its light dimming as the Voidborn drew closer. Eliza felt the strain of the battle, her energy waning as the chaos intensified. She glanced at the keepers, their forms flickering as they struggled to hold the line. "There are too many," she said, her voice tight. "We can't hold them off forever." The keeper beside her nodded grimly. "Then we must close the rift, but to do so will require great sacrifice." Eliza's gaze snapped to the rift, its energy swirling with violent intensity. She could feel the pull of Thales the Voidborn, their presence threatening to consume everything in their path. The thought of sacrifice made her stomach churn, but she knew there was no other choice. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. The keeper gestured toward the obelisk. "The obelisk is the anchor of the convergence. Its energy can seal the rift, but it requires a direct connection. You must channel your light into it, using the harmony you've created to stabilize the balance." Eliza hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "What happens if I fail?" The keeper's expression was somber. "If you fail, the convergence will fall, and the Voidborn will consume both realms." Taking a deep breath, Eliza steadied herself. "Then I won't fail." She sprinted toward the obelisk, her golden light flaring as she dodged the Voidborn's attacks. The keepers fought valiantly, holding the line as she reached the base of the towering structure. Placing her hands on its surface, she felt the energy of the obelisk surge through her. The harmony she had created within the threads resonated with its core, and she began to channel her light into it. The obelisk glowed brighter, its light spreading outward like a wave. The Voidborn shrieked, their forms dissolving as the energy washed over them. The rift began to close, its jagged edges folding in on themselves. But the strain was immense. Eliza's body trembled as the energy of the obelisk threatened to overwhelm her. She could feel the weight of the convergence, the threads of oak, the cord and the ordeal. There is soused, countless realms pulling at her from all directions. "You can do this, Eliza," the Nexus voice whispered, faint but reassuring. "You are the bridge. You are the light." With a final surge of energy, she channeled everything she had into the obelisk. The rift sealed with a blinding flash of light, and the Voidborn were gone. The city grew still, the golden crimson light of the convergence stabilizing once more. Eliza collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving as exhaustion washed. "Oh, you did it," the keeper said, its voice filled with awe. "The balance holds." Eliza smiled faintly, her resolve unbroken. For now, the convergence settled into an uneasy calm, the shimmering threads of gold and crimson weaving together once more. Eliza sat at the base of the obelisk, her breaths shallow as the last echoes of the battle faded into the void. The keepers moved around her, their forms flickering with renewed energy as they began to repair the damage left. "By the Voidborn, you've done more than we could have hoped for," one keeper said, kneeling beside her. Its eyes glowed softly, a mixture of admiration and gratitude. "But this is not the end, is it?" Eliza forced herself to stand, her legs trembling but her resolve steady. "No," she said. "The rift may be closed, but the Voidborn won't stop. They'll try again, and next time, the balance might not hold." The keeper nodded solemnly. "You are right. The Voidborn are relentless, and their hunger for destruction knows no bounds. But you have shown us that even the impossible can be achieved." The obelisk pulsed faintly, its light stabilizing but still tinged with the strain of the battle. Eliza placed her hand on its surface, feeling the energy within. The connection she had forged between the realms was fragile, but it held for now. The voice of the Nexus returned, soft but insistent. "Eliza, the threads call too. Hold you." The balance across the loom is shifting again. Her head snapped upward, her gaze sweeping the expanse of the convergence. In the distance, she saw faint flickers of light threads fraying, their energy dimming. The echoes of the great Voidborn's incursion had rippled outward, disrupting the delicate harmony she had worked so hard to restore. "I can't stay here," she said, turning to the keeper. "There's more work to do." The keeper inclined its head, its form glowing faintly. "The convergence will endure, thanks to you. Go, Guardian. The threads need you." The golden crimson bridge reappeared before her, stretching out into the void. Eliza stepped onto it, the hum of the threads resonating with her heartbeat. As she moved forward, the landscape of the convergence faded away, replaced by the infinite expanse of the loom. The Nexus spoke again, its tone calm yet urgent. "The balance is always in motion. Eliza, the threads you have mended are strong, but there are countless others that require your light." Eliza nodded. Her steps steadied despite the weight of her exhaustion. She had embraced her role as a guardian, but the scope of her task was overwhelming. The loom was vast, and the forces that threatened it were unending. As she walked, the threads around her began to shift, forming patterns that glimmered like constellations. She saw glimpses of worlds connected by the threads, flashes of life, love, conflict, and hope. Each one was a story, a piece of the balance that she had sworn to protect. The hum of the threads grew louder, and Eliza felt a familiar presence. The golden light around her flickered as Kale appeared, his form steady and resolute. He had changed since she first encountered him as once faded thread, now pulsed with vibrant energy. A testament to his redemption. "You didn't think I'd let you face this alone, did you?" he said, his voice warm with camaraderie. Eliza managed a faint smile. "I could use the help." Kale stepped onto the bridge beside her, his own golden light blending with hers. Together, they moved forward, their combined strengths illuminating the path ahead. The threads began to pull them toward a new destination, their energy vibrating with urgency. Eliza could feel the weight of the balance shifting, the harmony she had fought so hard to restore teetering once more. A sob, the void around them gave way to a new landscape. She steeled herself for whatever lay ahead. The journey was unending, but she wasn't alone. The light within her burned brighter than ever, a beacon of hope in the infinite expanse of existence. She took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The threads called to her, and she would answer. The balance awaited, and Eliza was ready. As Eliza and Kale moved forward on the shimmering bridge, the hum of the threads grew softer, almost melodic. The infinite expanse of the loom seemed calmer now, its light steady and reassuring. Yet, Eliza knew the calm was only temporary. The balance, though momentarily stable, was a living entity, ever-changing, ever-challenged. Cale broke the silence, his voice thoughtful. "You've carried this burden well, Eliza, but I can see it's taking its toll." She glanced at him, her golden light flickering faintly. "It's not the weight that gets to me," she said. "It's the thee, knowing that it never truly ends." Cale nodded, his gaze fixed on the threads weaving above them. "The balance isn't a destination. It's a journey, but journeys are easier when they're shared." For the first time, Eliza allowed herself to smile, a small, fleeting expression of gratitude. "It's good to have you here." The bridge shifted, its surface rippling as the threads guided them to a new destination. The light around them began to dim, and the hum of the loom grew quieter. Eliza felt a sense of finality in the air, as if the threads themselves were preparing her for what lay ahead. They stepped into a vast chamber, unlike any Eliza had seen before. The golden threads converged here, forming an intricate tapestry that filled the space with a warm, radiant glow. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, upon which rested a single, unbroken thread. It pulsed faintly, its light steady but subdued. "This is the Nexus anchor," Cale said. His voice is the Nexus anchor, Cale said, his voice filled with awe. "The core of the balance." Eliza approached the pedestal, her steps slow and deliberate. She could feel the energy of the thread resonating with her, a gentle reminder of the journey that had brought her here. Nexus returned, its tone soft but resolute. "Eliza, you have walked the path of the Guardian with courage and grace. You have mended what was broken and faced what many would flee. The balance endures because of you." She placed her hand on Theor's "because of you" thread, its light growing brighter at her touch. "But the balance is fragile," she said. "It will always need someone to protect it." "Yes," the Nexus replied, "and you have ensured that it will have guardians to carry on the work. The Fed keeper is Cale, and those who will follow, they will walk the path you have forged." Eliza's chest tightened, the weight of the words sinking in. "Then, is this the end of my journey?" The Nexus hesitated before responding. "Not the end, but a transformation. You have become more than a guardian, Eliza. You are the light of the loom, the embodiment of its harmony." The chamber began to glow brighter, the threads around her weaving into new patterns. Eliza felt a warmth spreading through her, a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The exhaustion, the doubt, the weight of her responsibilities, they all began to fade, replaced by a quiet certainty. Cale stepped forward, his golden light blending with hers. "You've done more than anyone could have asked, Eliza. You've given the balance a chance to thrive." She turned to him, her expression calm and resolute. "And you'll carry it forward. All of you, it will." The threads around her pulsed, their light enveloping her in a cocoon of golden energy. The voice of the Nexus spoke one last time, its tone filled with reverence. "You are the balance, Eliza Harrington, and the balance is eternal. Harrington." The light consumed her. Eliza felt herself dissolving into the threads, her essence becoming one with the loom. She was no longer a single being, no longer bound by the limits of her physical form. She was everywhere and everything, a part of her eyes, the infinite web of existence. The loom pulsed with renewed strength, its harmony restored. The bridge, the convergence, the threads, they all thrummed with a steady rhythm, a testament to the balance that would endure. Cale stood in the balance that would endure chamber, his gaze fixed on the glowing threads. He felt a quiet resolve settle over him, a promise to honor the legacy Eliza had left behind. The journey was far from over, but he would carry it forward. And so the light of the loom continued to shine, its balance held by those who walked the path of the guardian.